All right, folks, it's another edition of the online dinner party here at the International Broadcast Media, IBMTV.tv. For those of you that want to tell your friends about it and all of that, definitely have had a full week of activities going on here in Durham, North Carolina. And of course, folks are paying attention to a lot of things going around the world and all of that, whether it's folks dealing with that new violence that took place and the tragic death that was going on in Minnesota, or whether it's folks dealing with the COVID pandemic. And of course, folks are trying to get vaccinated. I'm still in that category of folks that need to get that vaccination as well. But I do know that some folks were concerned about the Johnson & Johnson variety and a number of other things that folks are paying attention to in the news, including the fact that Duke students will have to have proof of vaccination when they come back to the campus in the fall. And I've also heard that a former governor here in North Carolina is thinking about running for state senate. So though actually not state senate, but the U.S. Senate. He's going to try to take over the position for Richard Burr, that being our former governor, Pat McCrory. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out and what folks have to say about a number of things in that regard. So definitely a lot of folks are paying attention to many things happening in the world. And of course, folks are still paying attention to what's going on the border, as well as folks are still coming across the border. And of course, folks are trying to find jobs and other things. And we're even in this new hybrid environment where a lot of folks are working, well, they had already been working from home, but now they're working from home and the offices, as some offices are trying to get their workforce to come back into the offices. But I don't know that a lot of the workers are in a rush to get back until everything is safe in their mind. So that being said, I think we'll be in this hybrid model for a while. But I've got some tremendous guests, and I'm looking forward to having conversations with them about a number of things. So I'm going to bring a couple of them on, and I'll start with Manny Matella and learn about him and everything. And then we'll come on with Regina as well. So, Manny, it was my pleasure to meet you, like it was some of my other guests through Potted, which is a wonderful source to learn about people and their entrepreneurship and all of that. So if you want to share a little bit about your work and what you're doing, I know that you've got a lot of things on your table, including being a writer. So I'd love to hear you share a little bit of your personal journey. And then, like I said, we'll bring in Regina. It is Poetry Month, so I know she's going to have some poems for us and all, but I'm sure folks would love to hear your story and what you're involved in.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I want to thank you for having me on today. And my name legally is Manuel Padilla Jr., and I go by Manny. I'm a writer. I've written professionally for over 36 years, but a couple of years ago, I decided to, quote, retire, unquote, so I could write a novel. And it's been an interesting journey. I wrote my first short story when I was 8 years old. So I was always kind of a writer. And I always loved the English language and spoken word and all that. So I really started young, and I kind of always had the goal of being a writer. Throughout school, I favored the English classes over the science and the math classes. And I continued to write. When I got into high school, I got involved in the drama program. So you learn about words from a different aspect when you're performing in front of an audience. And again, I continued to write during that time. When I was a senior in high school, we had a contest where the drama department leadership said, write a one-act play, and if your one-act play is good enough, we'll produce it for the school. So basically we had, I think, 7 different students wrote one-act plays, and I wrote one as well. So mine happened to be selected, which made me ecstatic because I was in my forte. I was using the written word. In the end, I got to star in it, produce it, direct it, cast it. So it was quite an experience. I've also always been interested in psychology. So at that point, I was preparing to enter college, and I was going to go in for a degree in psychology, hoping to become a counselor. In the back of my mind, I still enjoyed writing, and that was my first love. But I didn't think that you could make a living at it, so I said, okay, I'll become a counselor because I know I can get a paycheck on that. Well, when I produced his play, after each performance, we would go out in front of the auditorium and greet the guests at the end of the show. Well, after 6 performances, all the English teachers from the school who went to the play pulled me aside and said, "What are you going to do with this?" And I said, "Do with what?" And they said, "You have a gift. You have you ever considered being a writer?" And in my mind, I said, "Yeah, I did." But you have to understand that I come from very meager roots. I'm a American-born Latino person. My parents my father barely graduated high school. My mother left in 11th grade to marry my father. So we were kind of just your typical Latin American family. Well, I had told my parents that I enjoyed writing, and the first thing that came out of my father's mouth was, "You'll starve to death." So I
Well,
would consider that an option. And that wasn't great encouragement. But after hearing these English teachers kind of vocalize to me that maybe there's something here, I threw caution to the wind. And when I entered the university, I changed my major to journalism. Um, and one of the points that I want to touch on today is the importance for diversity in literature and publishing and writing and all that. And uh, I had a lot of experience over the course of my career, which taught me how challenging this field was, especially as a minority. It was way more challenging. Things have really come around, but I don't think we're all the way there. I remember my first journalism class. Uh, my professor didn't like a story that I wrote, and I remember him calling me out in class saying, "Well, Mr. Padilla, we know sometimes when you come from a different culture, you may not understand the English language as Americans do." And this was in the late 70s, and it kind of hit me like a bullseye. This person didn't know me, he didn't get me. As I mentioned, I was born in America, my parents were born in America. Um, Half of my grandparents were born in America, so I'm what you call third generation.
right.
And back then you were not allowed to speak other languages in this country. It was very much frowned upon. So my parents did not teach us Spanish. This ended up being to our detriment decades later, but how could they know? In the 70s you were chided if you said anything in a language other than English. And I'll give you an example. When I was in grade school, and this was probably a turning point for me psychologically,
Mhm.
we went to Catholic school, and I said something in Spanish because, again, my parents would talk to each other in Spanish when they were saying things that they didn't want us to understand.
Right.
So I remember slipping and saying something in the classroom, and we had those nuns in those long black habits, and they had the rosary belts and the shaving straps, and so the nun called me to the front of the classroom and she said, "Mr. Padilla," she said, "we don't speak that way in this classroom. That's a dirty language, and I don't ever want to hear you talk that way again." Bam, she whacked me on the hands with the ruler. So you can imagine, to a 6-year-old who was just saying a word, to get reprimanded in that manner for saying something in a language which you've heard other people use. It was pretty bracing and shocking to me. And to this day, I have difficulty speaking Spanish. As I've gotten older, I've tried to pick up the language, but like anything, unless you're immersed in it constantly, it's a foreign language to me. And a lot of people have difficulty understanding that because they say, "Well, you're a Latino person, you're Mexican American, why don't you speak your language?" And I'm like, "Well, you have to understand, I'm an American. So I am speaking my language because we have that big old, great big melting pot, which we have
Right.
here in America. And we all bought into that, and hopefully we're still buying into that." But it made my life complicated. And as we saw over the years, as we've seen, the country has changed a great deal, and so that has made it okay now to speak other languages, to wear other garb, to have other customs and traditions. So that kind of is a little bit of a background how I started getting into writing.
No, I'd love to hear about some of your current writing, and I definitely want to bring Regina in, who's a writer as well, from the
Okay.
poet field, and a number of other types of writing as well. But I always think of her more in that poetic fashion and everything. But one of the questions I had for you, really quickly, is: do you feel that we're doing a decent enough job, or have you not seen enough improvement in terms of trying to get more of those voices of, say, the Latino Americans in the literary community? Because I know that sometimes we say that we want diversity, but I don't know that we've done a good enough job of actually getting that diversity out there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether we're doing a strong enough job in that regards.
Actually, I think we're failing pretty miserably as far as minority representation, own voices go in the publishing industry. I When I was pitching my novel is Coconut, brown on the outside, white on the inside, and some people may understand what that term means, others may not. So basically, being a coconut would be akin to a Latin person trying to pass for a white person.
Right.
And it wasn't really the case with me. It was just I was raised American. But I found some interesting statistics. And I remember when I was pitching my novel to literary agents, a number of times I got rejection saying I had trouble with the voice. I had difficulty understanding what this voice was about. And I am part of a number of Twitter groups and Facebook and the like. And this came up online several times where people are like, okay, this is code for they don't want to pursue a minority people of color book. If they can't understand the voice, then how are they going to be able to represent you? And statistically speaking, 76% of those in the publishing industry, the book publishing industry are white. 7% Asian, 6% Latino, 5% Black. 74% are women, 81% are considered straight, and 89% have no disabilities. So you can see the difficulty that represents. According to a website, Bustle, in 2018, more children's books featured an animal main character than children's books featuring a Black, Latino, Native, or Asian child. So when you see this lack of representation, what does this say to the children of today, to the young people? They're not represented. So that
Right.
was one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book. Was it conquers a number of stereotypes. One, that all Latino people speak Spanish. As I mentioned earlier, it was frowned upon when I was growing up. In fact, it was not allowed. What changed was in the 1980s, we had a huge influx of refugees from Central America and other parts of the world. And so all of a sudden, everybody was speaking Spanish. And so what changed then was people assumed that I was part of that immigrant wave.
Right.
And so people are like, well, why don't you speak Spanish? Are you ashamed of your race? And I'm like, no, I was born here and I'm an American, and I was never taught that. So that wasn't part of my culture. People to this day still don't understand that. I think if America was next door to Mexico, it would probably be easier for us, but it continues to be a difficulty. And I wrote professionally for 35 years before I decided to pursue the novel. So I had already encountered a lot of the attitudes toward minorities working professionally. So,
And I'm assuming that you were working professionally in the journalism field, and I know that there's been a push to get more Hispanic representation, even in the journalist field, whether that's in TV news or whether that's in radio or whether that's in print journalism. And I know that I'm a member of the NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists, but I know that there is a NAHJ as well, which has actually worked together on some efforts around diversity and things of that nature. So if you could share a little bit with our audience, and then, like I said, I'm gonna bring in Regina as well about what your whole background is in the sense of the newspaper work or the actual professional writing work.
okay. Well, yes, there are now more Hispanic publications as things progress more online. When I worked for a newspaper, I started out as a journalist. I worked at the Los Angeles Daily News for 9.5 years. So I started out as an editorial assistant. And by the end of my tenure there, I was a supervisor and a real estate editor. I remember when I would go into work, we worked in this big open office, and you could count the number of minorities sitting in this massive office on one hand and still have some fingers left. So that was how things were in the 80s. There was not a lot of minorities working in the field. And I don't know if I should say this, but I'm lighter skinned. So that kind of makes it easier. I think to an extent, I purposely did not wear a mustache or a beard or anything because I wanted to look as mainstream as possible. By the time I became an editor, I had empowered myself a little more. I said, you know what? They need to see a minority here. So I grew back the mustache and the beard as much as I could. And because I wanted people to see that minorities can hold these positions. I would do a lot of outreach to area high schools, encouraging these high school students to pursue creative careers and writing and things like that. And so it's changed a lot. I look at my nieces and nephews, and they didn't experience a lot of what we went through when we were younger. So I think things are changing a lot, but I think we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, definitely would agree with you on that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about what's going on with the border and everything. But before we get to that, as well as a number of other things that are going on in the world, I'd love to have Regina share a little bit about her background as well. I know that she is a talented poet and a talented writer of various sorts and everything, but would love for you to share with our audience here, which is a global audience, about yourself, where you're at, and some of the things that you're involved in as well.
Well, hello there, and thank you so very much for having me. And I have to say, it was amazing listening to Manny, because I grew up from the 5th grade till the time I graduated from high school in El Paso, Texas, which is right on the border. So I know exactly what he is talking about. Most of the Mexicans, and I say Mexicans heritage, they were not allowed to speak Spanish. Okay, my neighbors, the parents knew it, but the kids did not. And the Spanish that I spoke was what we learned in the Spanish book, which is very different from the spoken word that they actually speak. Okay. Right. And the things that I remember now, I still remember some things. It's the things that you learn on the playground when they're teaching you how to cuss. I still know how to cuss somebody out. I don't know what I'm saying, but I know how to do that. I can't remember anything else. So it's very, very funny. But, you know, it is very, very true. Life is so very different from growing up as a minority. I'm a writer. I'm a coach. I'm a singer-songwriter. And I didn't jump into my journey, my creative journey, until 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I decided to do that, because when I was growing up, the creative aspect was not anything that my family really nurtured, because my parents grew up in a small town in Texas called Marlin, Texas, and I think it's still very, very small, and they picked cotton. My father joined the military, that's what changed our lives, you know, and gave us a life. And we traveled the world and those kinds of things. And their thing for their children is to get a good education and get a real job. Okay.
Get that real job, right?
A real job. And girl, you might need to get a job and a husband. Okay. So, you know, so life is very, very different. And so I did that, you know, I pretty much did that. You know, when I was younger, I kind of planned my life, what it was going to look at. And I went off and I did some things when I was young, but always in the back of my mind, and then always reminded by my family who was surrounding me, and they were giving me what they knew, okay? What was security for them as get a real job. So even though I had that creative bent, I used to write. I'd write jingles and those kinds of things. I still have a great jingle for Levi's that they should have used, but I never gave it to them. So, but but they would think it's just going to pass. That is not a real life. That's something other people do. And even the singing, when I used to make my brothers be the Pips and I was Gladys Knight, or the Supremes, I'd beat them up if they wouldn't cooperate with me. That was something other people did. So, a lot of families are like that. So things are very, very much different. So like I said, it wasn't until I got married, had a real career, and it was thrilling. And I, married and thought I was going to have this dream life and put all my dreams on the shelf that I thought might happen one day. And my world fell apart. I got divorced, and my life, I had to decide what I was going to do then. And I decided I was going to live the life that I loved. And I was going to do exactly what I love, because that's what life is all about. Love. Yeah. Showing up in love and doing the things you love and showing people how to love. And so I remember it was about 5 years ago, we were together for Christmas with my brothers and sisters. We get together every other year together. And I informed them, yes, I'm writing a book. They didn't even know I could write. Okay. And not only that, I think I'm going to start singing too. And so they'd never heard me open my mouth other than being in the children's choir when I was a little kid. So, it was just, they thought, there she goes again, but you know what? There's a lot of people who have kept things on the inside.
Right.
And that's where they die. And I just didn't want all the things that were on the inside to die with me. So my trials, which I decided not to let it be something that kept me down, actually opened the door for me to live. And I'm trying to live. And the only problem is it's not just the not knowing how to do it, because I wasn't trained. I didn't go to school specifically to learn, to do journalism and know exactly how do you get your book published? How do you do this? Who are the contacts you should have? Because there's a group of people who they are connected and you're not connected to them. So you don't even get invited to the club. Right. So, and so that has been very, very funny, just navigating it. But, it's just one of those things you say, you know what? I'm in this to do it. I'm just in it to do it because I love it. So that's kind of how I got here. And I'm going to share how I decided to write my first poem. Okay. And I've been writing all the time. But before I got divorced, I was sitting in my bed. And my ex was sitting. He was like right next to me, kind of. And I don't know if you've ever felt like you're sitting next to somebody who's supposed to love you, but you feel very much alone. You can't even have a conversation with them. You feel that much alone. Okay. And that's how I felt. And I was feeling sad. And so I started thinking about my mom. And I was thinking, gee, my mother and my parents, both of them really, they showed me so much love. And that's kind of all I knew. And I just knew my life was not like the life that I had thought a married life would be like. Right. And so this song came to my head that I started, that we used to sing in church. My mother prayed for me. My mother prayed for me. She prayed all night long. She took the time to pray for me. I'm so glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed for me. And I'm sitting there and I'm going through that song in my head and I start feeling better. And I got the pen like I was going to write in a journal. And I had quit writing in my journal some time ago. And I started writing this poem called My Mother Prayed for Me. And then let me read it to you.
Yes, please.
Okay. And I think most people can relate to this. My mother prayed for me. She prayed that I'd be strong so that I could carry on when everyone was gone, because she cared for me and wanted me to be free, to be the best of me. And now I clearly see that it takes time to be a person who can really be free, because now I understand things happened I could not plan. Oh, yes, my mother prayed for me. And someone prayed for you to be that awesome individual you turned out to be. You know, I think with that, a lot of people, we always have to go back to that place of love to give us strength when we are feeling weak. And that's where that was for me. And that kind of opened the door, because what happened is I dared to show that poem to some of my friends a couple of months later, and they looked at me and they said, "Why are you not writing?"
Wow.
And I said, "I write all the time. I just don't show anybody." And they said, "Well, I think you probably should do the things you love. And the thing was, is I had been trying to fit in and do the things that were right or the things that were normal. And those things they didn't really satisfy my soul. But,
Right.
we're just trying to do the right things. And then I just decided, you know what? They are right. I only have one life. And I'm going to live it and do some of the things that I enjoy, because maybe it might inspire others to do the same. So that kind of got me on my journey of the writing. And then that led me to write my first book, which was Sometimes He Buys Me Grapes. And and what I write about in most of my writing is about what happens in life, what happens in relationships. In this particular book, behind me, take a good look, okay? Mm-hmm. It's about the heart of a seasoned woman. And everybody loves a seasoned woman because she's wise. And a woman is really the one who kind of keeps everything together for everyone. And she gives birth and all that kind of stuff. And so there are phases in life that we all go through. We go through family. When family's good for a woman, everybody's good, okay? And if it's not good, we're going to have some problems. Everybody's going to have some problems, okay? And then friends are like icing on the cake for all of us. That's the foundation, as far as I'm concerned, of what we all need in order to survive this life. And then we go into this area of confusion. It's called love, lust, and desire. Mm-hmm. I think we get knocked on our feet a lot in that, so we kind of go through that. And then in the relationship aspect, we all have at least gone through one breakup in our life, which can be devastating or not. And then we all move on, which can be good or not.
Right.
And then we go through this place where we come back to this, I call it the back to me moment, when we realize that, you know what, I'm okay. I may not be perfect, but I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we go through that phase several times. But what makes it okay is that we have our foundation, and that's our family and friends who wrap their arms around us, give us support when we need support, just love on us when we love us, and put us in our place when we need to be put in our place too. That's what they do. And so we survive as people together that way. So that's kind of what this book is about. But most of mine are about, we've been dealing with a lot of racism. Mm-hmm. And we see it, and people are, minorities has been screaming about it a long time from different aspects. And it's just probably the last year and a half, 2 years that the world has been able to view it in a different light. Because when you're taking a picture of it and it's live, and you're
Mhm.
actually seeing something happen to somebody that you would not want to happen to you. Okay. And you can really see the injustice then. And I think, and until you can picture, what if that was my brother? What if that was my mother? What if that was somebody that I loved? Or what if that was me?
Right.
Could it be different? It's very hard to look at. The first time I saw or understood kind of racism from the color standpoint was I was 5 years old. We were stationed in um, a town called Wells next to the sea, and it's off the Norfolk coast of England.
Mhm.
My daddy was in the military, so we traveled a lot when I was little. Like I said, he joined the military, and that kind of took us out of, gave us another opportunity in life. Okay. And so I'm going to read this poem and then we can just chat.
Yep, definitely.
Okay. This is called My Little Green Coat. Remember, this is taken from a 5-year-old aspect. I was 5 and I was feeling fine, sitting pretty in my new little green coat. I was really shy, but full of smiles. My mommy and daddy loved me in my little green coat. I was new in school. I didn't know to be cool. So I sat and read in my little green coat. When it came time to play, I looked all around to see that no one looked like me in my little green coat. There were some older girls who looked my way and then asked, "What is your name, little girl in the little green coat?" I told them and they said, "You are different than the rest of us. What a strange girl you are in your little green coat." I did not understand. I was a girl just like them. I wondered if they meant I looked strange wearing my little green coat. They said, "Your skin is so black. Your eyes are so dark. We have never seen anyone who looked like you, a girl who has skin like the night, little girl in your little green coat. You smile like us, but you don't look like us. Can we touch your hair? If you let us, we will buy you some candy. Can we see if you really are made like us? If you let us see, we will buy you some candy. Because we have heard that you are different than us, little girl wearing the little green coat. If you let us see, we will buy you some candy, little girl in the little green coat. I was confused. I thought these kids were fools. I was only 5 when I realized that I may be perceived differently because my skin was rich, like the foundation of the earth on which we all stand. It was then I understood that ignorance has no boundaries, and this would be the beginning of my real education. Racism. It starts with ignorance, which is the lack of understanding and thinking that if someone is not like you, they, not you, are inferior. You, not they, are wrong. All I can say right now today is I was only 5 years old when I realized that some people treat other people differently. It was then I became wise enough to see the world with much broader eyes, knowing I could not sit back and try to hide. I would have to stand up and show my pride and understand that my black skin was an incredible gift to mankind. But I was only 5, and I did look divine when I wore that adorable little green coat with a little black fur collar. So.
Oh, wow. What a powerful piece of work and everything. One of the things I was going to ask both of you, and I love, hopefully Manny's got some work for us as well, but one of the things I was going to ask both of you to come up on the network several times is one of our founders of this network, Nick Palveda, and others that are affiliated with the network, talk about the fact of education. And they are actually of the opinion that we have 18th century values, even though we're in the 21st century in terms of the way we're teaching our young people. I would actually argue that we're not teaching them enough about diversity. We were actually having this conversation on a show earlier today and all of that. But I was wondering y'all's thoughts as two individuals that come from different parts of the world and everything is, do you feel that our school system is doing a good enough job of, one, teaching about creativity, and two, teaching about diversity? So I guess I'll turn it over to you, Manny, first, but I would love to hear from Regina about that as well.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Mark, because I was born and raised in Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley specifically. And as I had mentioned, I went to Catholic school. Well, we were in a community called Pacoima, which is a lower middle class area. And our school was actually a melting pot. We had every color under the sun going to that school. So we had white kids, we had brown kids, we had black kids, we had Asian kids, we probably had some purple kids in there as well. And we never saw color. The whole time that I was in grade school, I never noticed colors, because from day one, when we all went into first grade, we were just immersed together. So that wasn't something that was specific to us. So there wasn't really any need to teach about diversity because we were kind of living it. As we started to get older, as we progressed in throughout the grades, you started to see some cracks beneath the surface. And those were the outside influences that started saying, well, you know, these types of kids aren't going to have the same opportunities as those types of kids. So it wasn't something that came from within the children's group. It was something I think we learned from within the community and outside. I had also mentioned that I did a lot of speaking at high schools when I worked at the Daily News, and that was in the 80s and the 90s. Well, again, there was a lot of diversity, but you were having a lot more immigrant children coming from other countries, not just Mexico, from the Middle East, from, you know, parts of Europe and everything. And so I think their experience was a lot different than ours, because a lot of these young people did not grow up in the same environment. So they were kind of thrown in together with everybody else, and they're saying, okay, get along. Well, they didn't know how to get along necessarily because these people are foreign to them. So I think based upon what we continue to see, I think we need increased education on diversity and tolerance, and embracing other cultures. I think that's one of the most wonderful aspects of being in America, is that we have so many wonderful different cultures here. And if we could just get the different factions or extremists, one way or the other, out of the way, I think things would go a lot smoother.
Right.
What are your thoughts, Regina?
My thoughts are, like I said, I went to school in El Paso, Texas. The school that I went to in high school, I'll say in high school even, it was diverse, but we probably had maybe 7% Blacks, maybe 20% or 25% Mexican American, and the rest Caucasian white. And I've always been in an interracial, or the mixed community, and I learned that was my normal, fitting in, learning how to do things their way, okay, to get things. But I was always in the top 10% in school. And I remember my senior year. Now, remember my parents. My mother had her high school education. My father went and got his later on, and actually got his college degree after I had left home, okay? But I remember going to speak to my counselor as I was going in my senior year, and wanting to find out, about colleges and stuff like that, because my parents they didn't go. And she was telling me that I was not college material. Mm-hmm. And I remember, and she said, you need to probably just go become a beautician or something like that. And I remember I was just crushed. She didn't talk to me about anything about SATs. I had never heard about an SAT or any of these things, what they used to, I think, do is kind of pull you in. And if you had family who had been to school, but I was the first one in my family to go, for a bachelor's, so that was not my norm, and that was not anything that we really talked about. And so when she told me that I was not college material, I remember going down the hall crying, and Mr. Lacey, he was a wonderful, wonderful man. He said, "Regina, what's wrong?" And I said, "I just left the counselor, and she said that I was not college material," which he was like, "What?" Because I was always a good student. I just didn't understand why I was not college material. And he says, "I don't ever want you to talk to her again." And there was an African-American counselor there, Miss Givens. And he said, "I want you to talk to her when you need to talk to somebody." But by then I was just, when you have that kind of stuff thrown at you, you start thinking, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And I always felt like I had to do something else. And how many other people, minorities, did that counselor tell that to? Mm-hmm. And so, the reality of minorities not getting a fair chance, even if they could have a fair chance, sometimes it's not always been there. And then you talk about the creative aspect. You only have creativity if you're in an environment where the creativity is there for you as well. And so, some of the things that we learn when we get older or get away from it or get exposed to it when we leave home, and it depends how then can you make a living and jump into it or decide, what am I going to do? So, it's one of those things I think we really have to be more aware of and make opportunities available for more people. And I think these days, because we have so much more, the internet, and people are more open, that the kids, I'm just thrilled that they have more opportunities, but it's still not, it depends where they are. It depends what kind of funding is available for them and access, because you still have to deal with what if they have things that prevent them from being able to even take advantage of what may be there, because nobody gives them the information.
Right.
If I didn't know what an SAT test is, because nobody ever mentioned it to me when I'm in the office, when I should have gotten it as a junior, even as a sophomore, but they just figured, you don't need to go to school. Luckily, I did. And, on my own, but, through the years, but, the road is not equal, and it's not always the same for most people.
Right.
And we have to remember that, and we have to know that, and we have to really be diligent, because everybody deserves the same opportunity. The same opportunity.
Yeah. No doubt about that. One thing that I was curious to hear from both of you is, we know that when Biden came into office, he had Amanda Gorman recite that poem, and definitely we saw a rise in her work and her prominence, being a young poet and everything. And I've got friends that are in the spoken word community here in Durham, North Carolina, and around our surrounding areas like Raleigh and Greensboro and Winston-Salem. But I was just wondering your own thoughts about how important the spoken word community is to our youth, and also just kind of your reflections on the young guards of those in the spoken word community.
Regina, you want to speak to that one?
I think it's fabulous. I think anytime that our youth can get an opportunity to speak in however they want to, it's there, because they're expressing their experience, first of all. And it doesn't have to be something that any of us really understand, but we have to be open enough to try to hear what they're saying, because through all of the years when even when you think about music, I remember I had that Motown music going on when I was a kid. Hey, and my mother like, girl, turn that noise off, and for every generation, when you go back, all of our parents, we think all of that's noise, when we, the rap, for some parents, they're like, oh, all that noise. But it's not. It's the music that they love and that speaks to them. And when you find something that speaks to your child, And to them, that allows them the freedom to express. And when they feel free enough to express who they are to you, then that opens a whole nother world of an experience that you can share with them and grow together. And that's really what we're supposed to be doing anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
I think also we live in different times. Regina and I both express that when we were growing up, we were kind of trained, you got to get a stable job. Well, things economically have improved, hopefully for more of the population. So that frees the younger generations up to new ways of thinking.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to think, I've got to get the 9-to-5 job to make it. And I've noticed that there's a lot more freedom in their thought than we were, because again, you go back to the 30s, the Depression in America, and all that influenced the upbringing of people in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was when both parents started working in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that their children are given different opportunities than were presented to us. So I think that really will encourage a lot of growth in diversity within the community in the creative arts.
Oh yeah, definitely. One of the things I was going to get to, Manny, is I would love for you to tell folks about this novel that you put together and a little bit about its storyline and what it's all about. And if you want to share some of either that work or some of your other work, like Regina did, I'm sure our audience would love to hear that as well. But I know folks that are watching that probably want to know a little bit about what the storyline is and a little bit more about it.
Great. Okay, so my novel is Coconut, brown on the outside, white on the inside. And a lot of people may not be familiar with that term. I was speaking with another interviewer a few weeks back, and she really hadn't heard the term coconut before. And I said, oh yeah, we were called coconuts, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but we had different names for other minority groups. African Americans could sometimes be called Oreos, if you're black on the outside, white, and Asians were bananas, yellow on the outside. So I think those are no longer acceptable terms, but when I was growing up, that was pretty common that we would call each other those names. And so what Coconut is about, it explores the often humorous, sometimes painful experiences of a Mexican American family living during the civil rights era. And there was so much going on during that period with all different cultures. We had so much change going on within the country. And the seed of the novel came from an experience that I had when I was 4 years old. So Regina was kind of like your green coat. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the opening of the novel so you can get a sense of as a Mexican American how we experience racism. And the opening is Beaner, Beaner, Beaner. Get away from here, you smelly Beaner. The words etched like hot burning coals into the 5-year-old mind of Aurelio Rodrigo. Get off of this merry-go-round. You don't belong here. Go back to stinking Tijuana. As the pair spun around on the metal apparatus, Aurelio looked at the little girl who screamed the confusing words at him and considered the situation as only a child could. What's a beaner was his first thought. He deducted from the little blonde girl's harsh manner that it wasn't a very acceptable thing. He surmised that it must have been something quite bad, considering the tone and the way that blue veins were bulging in her freckled little neck. Further, he reasoned that he must be perhaps one of them, and that concerned him. He looked down at his chocolate brown arms, rubbed the perspiration from the brow beneath his straw black hair, and hung his head down toward his flat and wide bare feet. He thought once again, does this have something to do with being a beaner? Am I a beaner? Aurelio, who most often was referred to as Ori, began to feel lightheaded, and sweat began running down his flushed cheeks. In his young mind, he tried to piece together why he was being called something that didn't sound very nice. In fact, it sounded really bad. He had heard the word before, but he had never been called it himself, and he wondered what had changed to make him worthy of being called such a name. He spun around the merry-go-round trying to make sense of it all as the little girl continued to glare in anger. In considering everything, even in his young mind, he knew he had done nothing wrong, which was even more confusing. He suddenly felt very hot and bubbling up through his perspiration. He felt shame and guilt, like the times his mother punished him for misbehaving. Then he began to feel like he wanted to cry. The words had hurt him, not like getting stung by a bee or falling off his bike, but instead it hurt from the inside. As the little girl continued to scowl, he grew concerned that she might try to hit him, so he felt it was best to take action, and quickly. He jumped off the Brand Park steel gridded merry-go-round, skinned his right knee during his fall into the sand, and ran off to find his mother. So that's kind of the opening of the novel. And what the novel focuses on is the kind of trials and tribulations of this Mexican American family. As I said, the children were not raised to speak Spanish, and it kind of details the experiences of what the children go through in school. Eventually, one of the offspring, the daughter, becomes a Chicano rights activist. Another son gets a girl pregnant. The mother goes through various travails and ends up having depression, which depression in the Latino community is not something that traditionally is spoken about. It's considered a sign of weakness and shame. So I threw all these things into the mixing pot, and underneath it all is this little boy, Aurelio Ori, is gifted. And so he's confused because he starts having these dreams and aspirations, but everybody, like Regina shared, said, no, you're not going to get that. That's not for you. So move on. And in the 70s, less than 7% of Mexican Americans graduated from college. Like Regina, my brother and I were the first children in our extended family to graduate from college. And it was really difficult at the get-go because we had no role models. There wasn't anybody in our family that we could say, hey, what's this experience going to be like, or can you help me or guide me? We didn't have any of that, so we kind of had to learn it on our own. And so ultimately, I won't tell you what happens at the end of the book, but the lead character ends up taking on as many challenges as he can encounter, and that includes a school. There's another aspect of the Latino culture, and it's called La Familia, the family. That's a big part of traditional Spanish Latino upbringing. And when I was growing up, I saw that as a detriment. My parents were very forward-minded and encouraged us to pursue whatever goals we could. But a lot of those within the traditional culture believe that the family should stick together no matter what. The priority is what happens in that family. You're not encouraged to leave that nest for whatever reason. And I saw that as being stifling. So the characters in this book have to deal with that mentality. So, is it okay for him to want to go to college, or does he have to stay home and take care of his family? So that in a nutshell is what Coconut is about. And I'm presently working on a second novel, which is going to be geared toward middle grade children. And so I'm encouraged by what I accomplished in the first book to go on and write about this. I'm purposefully using minorities in this because, again, I remember growing up, you know how you have those little license plates that you put on the back of your bike? Well, there was never any manual on that rack. So I want some of these kids to see, hey, they have names like we do. So that's a real important thing that I want to pursue at this part of my career, is making these children feel that they belong and that they can have whatever they desire.
It's interesting. A couple of things crossed my mind as you were talking. One, you were talking about the term coconut. I had actually heard a term similar to that a classmate of mine used when I was at Marquette, because I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, and actually he went into work in everything from public relations to TV. We might have done some work in newspapers as well. But my good friend Danny Hermosillo, who is still involved in media there in that area, he was talking about the fact of once a time we got together with some of our other students. I'm an African American descendant, but I also have some Native American blood in me as well. And then there was also some folks there that were German and maybe Polish or some other ethnicities, and they had a party. And we've got to remember, these are high school kids and everything. Well, not high school, college kids, and they called it Manly Night. And what Manly Night involved was going to a bunch of guys hanging out together and telling ethnic jokes and telling other kind of bad jokes as well. And part of those ethnic jokes involved that whole concept of different terminology. So, like I said, I do remember that they used the term taco, which is another version of coconut and everything. But there were also some people that were taking jokes about apple, which is a Native American version of an Uncle Tom or an Oreo as well, because they're red on the outside and white on the inside, and definitely used the term Oreo and a number of other terms. And the other thing that the women that are watching this show will be shocked about was, like I said, these were college kids, and even to this day, college kids sometimes have that whole hormone thing going on as well. So the other part of Manly Night was watching basically a blue movie. So between all of that, I didn't stick around there that long. I decided that it wasn't worth it, even at my young age and everything, because I think I was probably about 18 or 19 at that time. And I like, this does not sound overly exciting to me. So, like I said, I left after a couple of the jokes and realizing what the movie that they were showing was. So, like I said, that wasn't my idea of fun, but I know it's the idea of some people's idea of fun, is to sit there and tell bad jokes around race and other things. One of the other things, Manny, I was curious about is, I know you talked about family, and I know family has been very important. I actually sometimes think that we in the African American community have sometimes gotten away from that because of the we had the great migrations, and there have been other great migrations as well. So I don't know that we are as strong all the time as we used to be with our grandparents and our great grandparents and all of that. And I'd like to see us kind of do more of that. But I am always very proud of the way a lot of our Latin American and our Asian American brothers bond together, sometimes even staying in the same house, 3 or 4 generations together in those houses and everything, as part of that whole family connection. And the other thing is that there is definitely a thought of the machismo aspect of the Latin American community. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on both the family aspect as well as that machismo element that exists in the Latin American community. And then I'd love to hear Regina's thoughts as to whether she agrees with me that maybe we in the African American community have gotten away from the family roots as strong as they used to be back in the day. But I'll start with you, Manny, and then hear from Regina as well.
Well, I find it interesting because I'm third generation, and because I was raised, as I said, more American than Mexican American. The traditional family setup was not something that we had within my family. We were encouraged to participate in school programs, sports. I was in drama, as I mentioned, academic programs and things like that. So from the time that we were children to being in high school, we were doing things outside of the household. And I had seen with some of my friends that when it came time to decide, am I going to go to college or am I going to pursue this career, their parents weren't necessarily supportive. And I think that happens more where the parents don't speak a lot of English because they're afraid that their communication line is going to be cut once that child leaves home. So it's a really complicated thing. When I was working throughout my career, I was very ambitious, and I did advertising, PR, corporate communications, marketing. I've done all those different types of jobs. And what that meant was I didn't have a lot of time for my family. So throughout my 20s, 30s, and 40s, I missed many, many family events because I had to work, or I was pursuing this project or that. And my family understood. Once I stopped working and started focusing on the novel, I kind of did a 180 because I realized how much of my family's life I missed out on. And that was actually kind of sad for me because my parents had raised us to be ambitious. And through that ambition, we overlooked the importance of what that family unit was about. So since then, I've set up goals for myself for being with my family, and I really enjoyed it at this point. It's I feel I probably had to go through all those career things so that I could get to that point to appreciate my family more. My nieces and nephews are much more integrated because they have myself and my brothers talking to them about the importance of having a well-rounded life, not just pursuing the golden ring, or the brass ring. The machismo thing. Yeah, I think that still is probably out there. It kind of makes me chuckle, because if you have to prove that you're macho, then that probably means you aren't the most macho. Certainly, the newer immigrants coming into the country, I think that's a security valve for them. They're thrown into an environment in a country where I can't imagine what they must feel every day when they wake up, having to encounter all these people that live quite differently than a lot of them that were raised. So I think that the machismo kind of becomes an armor for them to protect them from the influences that are going on around them. But yeah, I think the machismo thing hopefully will go away.
Yep. Regina, what's your thoughts about what I said about the fact that maybe we in the African American community got away from some of those family roots and things because of the spread out of jobs and things of that nature? But definitely, it seems to me that I'd say over the last several generations that it's not as close as it used to be. I remember definitely lots of family reunions and things in the earlier parts of my life that aren't as popular now. I mean, maybe certain regions they are, but they don't seem to be as popular.
Well, I have to agree with you to some degree. My parents, though, they raised us, my brothers and sisters. If I wanted to go somewhere, I might have to take my 3 younger brothers, which was not always fun. Okay. When you're in high school or whatever, and it's like, Daddy, can I go to a party? Yeah, you can go, but you have to take your 3 younger brothers with you. And it's like, I think I'll stay home. But my parents would say, you need to learn to love each other because all you may have one day is each other.
Right.
No one else is promised to you. Okay. So as we grew up through the years and when I went off and got married, so the only reason when I left home and I moved to Los Angeles, I wanted to go to New York and tried modeling. And my father said, you can stay home or you can go to LA. The only reason I could go to LA is because I had family there.
Yeah.
And I could go live with family. Because when we left home, they wanted us to go somewhere where we had some love.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we were raised. And so what happened through the years is even after I got married, and then you have your spouse who has their family and that kind of thing. For the last more than 30 years now, every other year, my brothers and sisters and their families, we get together for Christmas. Mm-hmm. And so what it is if you want to keep that connection together, because we are spread out all over the world,
right,
you have to make a commitment. And some families do, and some people think, oh, I'll do it next week. I'll do it next year. I'll do it, those kinds of things. And so I think when our parents were growing up, a lot of times the kids, they were sent to the grandparents for the summer or something like that. If you probably have stories like that. And so they don't do that anymore. So yes, we've gotten away from it if you don't make a commitment, to it. And I think that's really what we all have to do, because we really do need our families to be there. And then, growing up in El Paso, like I said, there in the neighborhood where I lived, there was the machismo, and I think what it was too is I saw a lot of it. But you know what? It was good and bad. But some of my friends, they would be there to protect any woman sometimes too. I remember they had this fight one year in the high school because there always been race things, and then usually race things happen because somebody said something that somebody else they didn't like. Right. And they just happen to be different colors or whatever. And so then it becomes a cultural thing. And I remember all the Blacks used to go on the hill after school and wait for the bus. And I remember Ricky Estrada. I'd known him since 5th grade. And we didn't hang together, but he lived around the corner. And he's like, Regina, do not go up on that hill today, because we're going to whoop some ass, and I'm laughing, when you think about it, because it was going to be Mexicans and Blacks fighting. Supposedly the principal stopped it. But what it is it tells you that race wars, when we look at people for who they are,
Right.
is really what it is you like people who you like.
Right.
And sometimes you like people that you don't know, or you decide not to like them because you don't know them. But if we just decided to just like the people who show up, how they show up, and it really didn't matter what color they were, and we had a great conversation with them, because when you have a great conversation with them, you don't even see color anymore. And that's the one thing that I really do love, the fact that my parents tried to do. And then having to culturally, like when we traveled a lot, we were sometimes the only Blacks. And so having to learn how to fit in and see, well, will they like me? I don't know. Will I like them? I don't know.
Right.
And you realize it's not a big deal. And we make so many things that are not that important such a big deal when they really don't have to be. When the biggest deal is how do we all live
Right.
a life that we like and we can enjoy, and so that we can all kind of help each other, because we all kind of want the same things in life.
Yeah, no doubt about that. We all want the same thing and all of that. And so too often I think that we allow other folks to paint the stereotypes and to let the stereotypes be stuck in our head and everything. Because I know a lot of times when folks think about Mexican Americans, they'll think about a couple of things. They'll think about one, the drug culture and all of that, or they'll think that they are doing all of them construction work. And I'm not saying that there is not a large amount that are in that construction field, but then there'll also be a certain element of society that'll be like, why are they taking our jobs from us and everything? But then when you turn around and ask them to do that work, they look at you with a cross-eyed and everything. So they're doing work that is in their trade that they have learned about, and
Right.
then they're doing it because they are skilled at it. And then a lot of times folks are like, but they're taking jobs away from the U.S., this and that. And then folks are also oftentimes amazed by the things that people will do, because I know in the news there's a lot of conversation around the young kids that are coming over the border and everything, and people are like, but how are they meaning the parents, letting those kids grow across the border, not understanding that part of that is probably about family, where they're asking them to go across the border and hopefully bring the rest of the family across the border at some point as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about those stereotypes as well as the current border situation.
I think it's very complicated, and it's rather unfortunate because you see how much of the world is struggling, and I think we live in the richest country in the world. In a number of factions. I remember seeing something on 60 Minutes about 15 years ago, and it always stayed with me. And it was somewhere in the Middle East, and this person was trying to get to America, and they were interviewing him, and he gave up everything that he could to try to get smuggled to the US. And he said, don't you realize that everybody is trying to go to the United States? You have the best country in the world. And I was like, wow, this is on the other side of the world. And, we're used to Mexico because it's right next door. But I think that's a lot of mentality. And when you see the desperation of these parents that are basically throwing their children on the other side of the fence saying, okay, I put a phone number for you. It's got to be frightening, for the child especially, but for the parent as well. So I think we still have a lot of work to do in that regard. And it's unfortunate because of the climate that we've had over the recent years when we've seen racism on the uptick. This just adds fuel to the fire. It's encouraging people to believe that, look at all these people are going to come and be a drain on our society, which statistics show they're not. But I think we do need to start trying to work with other countries so people don't feel that they have to escape.
Right.
I have to agree with you. First of all, it would be very scary to think that I would have to, for my child to have a better life or be able to feed him, that I would have to give him away, which is basically what they're doing, or taking a chance that he's going to have a better life on his own, being so young. And luckily, most of us here don't have to think that way. But the other thing is when you see that that's happening at the border, yeah, there's some things that need to happen on our side and the uh, other side, both sides of the borders, for the people, because somebody has to take care of these children when they get here.
Right.
Okay. And so you can't just let them be loose like that. But, the fact that their parents want them over here is, you can't put a Band-Aid on the problem. You got to go to the source and try to fix it. And so we need to figure out what is the source on our side and their side, and how do we eliminate all of that. And so there has to be an equal and a fair way when we decide to let immigrants in from wherever. Okay, we don't want the ones coming over from Mexico or Africa or other countries, but we will let the ones from the Netherlands come, okay? No, they don't have to have a job. No, they don't have to have anything. They just have to have the right skin tone. There is not that kind of fairness, so you have to make it equal for everybody if they're going to come here. There's not certain things, so, and that's where when you start talking about race, is everybody just wants an equal opportunity. We don't want what you got. Right. We don't want your stuff, okay? We don't want your stuff. We want the ability to have our own. And only way we want our own is we want to work for it. Nobody minds working. And you're right. People come over here and they have skills and they use the skills that they have. And a lot of times they take up jobs that nobody else wants. And so no, they don't take your job. They do not take your job because you didn't want the job, and you still, and if it wasn't there, you'd be upset. You would be upset. You don't want to go out and pick any fruit in the garden, all day long. You don't want to do that. So stop acting like you do.
Yeah, exactly.
And can I add to that, Mark? Because I had an interesting experience when I worked at the California Endowment, which is the largest health foundation in the state of California. And I, like many Americans, saw the immigrants as being a problem, an issue, and all that back in the 80s. Well, we went to a farm worker camp, and it was unbelievable what we witnessed. As you would have these 2-room shacks, basically a kitchen and a bedroom / living room. And you had anywhere from 10 to 15 people living in those 2 rooms. They shared a communal bathroom with probably 100 other families. And this bathroom looked like something out of a third world horror movie. And all the families, they only had one bathroom for all those households. And I could not believe that was in the Central Valley of California. And I think if people saw that kind of set off a light bulb in my head that these people are doing whatever they can to survive, and they're trying to better their life, and they're working for it. And, we tend to make light of their situation, but I don't think any of us could live in that environment. And
I know another thing that we sometimes do in terms of stereotypes, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about this as 2 folks that have lived on the West Coast, is that too often we get caught up in, we all would love to be, and I know it's one of my Achilles heels, would love to be multilingual and all of that, but definitely those that are in the Latin American community are almost required to be multilingual, and definitely that's part of an asset that folks have in that regard. But too often I find that folks, when they get on an elevator, get in a public building, and they hear folks of any of the Latin American countries speaking in their native language, or speaking sometimes in the native slang language, they automatically think that the people are talking about them and worried about what they're saying, when they're probably discussing groceries, or they might even be discussing what their next date is and everything. But it really has nothing to do with the people that are there in the space with them and everything. But oftentimes the 2 people, because they don't understand what it is, whether it's Spanish or whether it's Hindu or whether it's one of the African dialects, they automatically are stereotyping those folks and feeling that they're talking about them. So I was wondering, Manny, have you had experiences like that, and how have you dealt with that? Because I know that definitely, even in the African American community, I was talking earlier today that I know years ago, and I was about as light as you can get. I was on an elevator and literally saw a white woman clutch her purse and everything because of some of the fears that she had and everything. And I think I had a briefcase with me at the time, but I was wondering some of the things that you might have dealt with.
Okay, to this day, I cannot wear a Pendleton shirt. You know what Pendletons look like, the plaid things? Because I look like a gang member, truthfully. If I wear a beanie, forget it. Beanie Pendleton, boy, they're going to call 911 on me. So you still have that. And I've had those experiences where people will walk to the other side of the street when they see a minority person coming toward them. As far as Spanish speaking, God, I wish I could speak better Spanish because I would have had a lot more jobs in my career and they would have paid better. But when people come up and start talking to me in Spanish, before the 80s, I used to get very resentful because it's like, I'm an American here. Why are you speaking to me in a foreign language? Because that's how we were raised. Afterwards, I learned to desensitize myself toward that. So now if somebody talks to me in Spanish and I can understand them, I'll try to help them or answer them as best I can. But I don't like when people still assume that, okay, I see a brown person, they must speak Spanish. And that was a big thing in Coconut, was that I wanted people to see this is an American family. They are like Father Knows Best. They're like Beaver Cleaver, but they happen to be Mexican American. And so that was a real important aspect that I try to cover in my novel.
Yeah, and definitely doing a great job of that. Definitely showing folks what's going on. Have you had some experiences just within the African American women space and everything, where folks? Because I know that definitely we talk about it within the African American male space, but I imagine that even the ladies have problems as well.
We do. Sometimes they think that Black women are too vocal or loud. We can get loud. And they want us to speak very softly because they do. And that's not how we express ourselves sometimes. And why can they express themselves like they want to express themselves? And then there's this also racial thing too, where what you see on TV, where they even try to, and they used to, not so much anymore, but had Black women afraid of Black men. Clutch your purse. If he has this on, this on, and this on, he must not be safe, and so they, where they try to make us not even feel safe with our own, for a while. And you get in the elevator and you're like, oh, let me hold my purse really close. He must, that kind of thing. And so, you saw a lot of that because that's what we saw on TV. Those were the images, and if that wasn't where you grew up or safe, or you didn't know the people and that kind of thing, you just don't know. And luckily nowadays we are more aware of the disparities that we have seen, and we don't have to buy into all of that. We don't have to buy into all of that, because even if you look at hoodies, why is it okay to be afraid of a Black child in a hoodie and not a white child in a hoodie?
Right.
Why? I don't understand that.
Yeah, because I know one of the other things that I've talked about it on this show as well as other shows that I've been part of, as well as just listening to other shows, is that sometimes you also get caught up in some of the stereotypes that you just referred to, Regina, the stereotypes that we place on ourselves and everything along those lines. Because I'm a man in his late 50s and everything, and have been single pretty much all my life, except for those dating situations I might have been in here and there, but never been in that marriage situation. But I do know that there are still some folks that in the dating world, even to this day, they put you in those boxes. And if you're not of a certain, don't drive a certain car, don't have a certain job, don't have a certain kind of other thing, then they automatically rule you out as a potential date. And I'm oftentimes fascinated by that, because in a lot of ways that seems very materialistic, but there is some of this materialism trait, and I think that grows across cultures and across races and across divides. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about that, because I definitely think that sometimes we get caught up too much in not just understanding the person as an individual, but wanting to know, do you have that right job? Do you have that right car? Do you have that right family in some cases?
Yeah. I'll go. I think that we go through periods in life, all of us do, okay? You're looking for that right girl that looks like just that bombshell, okay? You want she has to be the right shade of brown or the right shade of blonde hair or right whatever. So, but I think you live and you learn. You realize that what you thought you wanted was a visual thing and it wasn't real, okay? And so when you get to a point where you realize what you really are looking for, or you take the time to really get to know somebody and know, could this be an actual soulmate? Do we even have a good conversation that can go deeper than the surface?
Right.
You know, then it will open other doors. But you have to get to that point. And when you're younger, I remember going out and my girlfriends, when I was young, girl, if you don't have the right shoes on, don't talk to him. If they scruffy shoes, don't talk to him. At the club, and I know you guys have you guys go through things. I have brothers. I remember, hearing them talking to their friends, they were talking about. So all of us have those things, and sometimes we outgrow them and sometimes we don't. But I think with age, you realize that there are certain things that really make you happy in life.
Right.
And that really is the bottom line, because with all the money, there's some comforts that you want. Yes. Right. But you can't take none of this stuff with you.
No, definitely can't do that.
You can't take
definitely can't do that.
Yeah, you can't take any of it with you. And when I was a drug rep in the pharmaceutical industry, and I used to work with geriatric patients along with the physicians, and I'd be talking to people who had lived a long life, and some of them would have a lot of money, and they say, you know what? I spent all my life trying to get this money, and I was mean as hell and all this other kind of stuff. And I just wish that I had somebody who actually just loved me for me.
Right.
And that started turning my head to look at things differently. It really is all about love.
Oh, yeah.
Can I connect with somebody and they want to connect with me in a way that is real beyond the surface? And, when we can get to that point with whomever, and sometimes you can find out or build that with the person you have, but it takes a whole nother way of looking at not tomorrow, but right. Next year and 5 years from now. What are we going to have together? Well, we look at each other and say, you old, but you cute still,
Yeah. Exactly. That's what you got to have in everything. It's interesting you said that about the you can't take it with you, because there's a famous blues line. And even though I'm known for the blues music that I play on a couple of radio stations and everything, I can't think of the artist that did it off the top of my head. But the line is basically, I have never seen an armored car at a funeral home yet. And that's actually a line from one of the blues songs. And I definitely have to agree with that line, because I know that there are a couple of definitely graveyards and other things that aren't that far away from me here. And they're right. I haven't seen an armored car in any of them yet. So you can't take it with you, like you just said, and everything. You said that you had worked with the geriatric population, and one of the things that always fascinates me about just folks that have managed to get into those older ages, whether that's 100 or 103. We just had a lady that passed here that was one of our community people here in Durham, North Carolina, that made it to 103. I think she was only maybe a week or two away from her 104th birthday and everything. But one of the things, when you talk to those folks, oftentimes they have done everything wrong. So I'm sure you've had those kind of experiences, because when you talk to them, they'll tell you that they were drinking a bottle of gin a day, or they were smoking 5 or 6 cigarettes a day. But everything that the doctors tell us we're not supposed to be doing, that's what they were doing. I imagine that after this pandemic is over, we'll find folks that told you, no, I never wore a mask one day in my life and everything, but they still managed to make it to 100 or something like that. But I was wondering, Regina, what were some of the experiences that you had like that with some of your past folks that you were working with when you were working with that drug company?
Well, you know what? It was just really funny. I guess the funniest things would be some of the patients who sometimes would be going into Alzheimer's or dementia, and they would kind of forget what was happening, but they could remember everything that they did.
Right.
Yeah, you know, and hearing their experiences um, about how they showed up or all, or else, I think the funniest thing was there was a mathematician that I was talking to in one of the nursing homes, and you could throw anything at him and he could come up with stuff that I would have to look up, okay, or pull it up on my computer and throw something at him, and he could come up with it, but you couldn't ask him about what happened 5 minutes ago, and that he
Mm-hmm.
would remember. But he would remember things like, um, you know, I really had my children, I had children and this happened and I loved them. And then when I lost my son, it just really tore my, they remember the stuff, the things that they remember and they really hold on to. And I think it holds in your heart are the things that touch your heart,
Right.
And so, what that told me is all this other stuff, because it never really was about their money.
Right.
It never really was about their money, other than their money gave them the freedom to buy stuff that didn't mean that much to them after they had the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or else it was a ways they could prove that they were as good as somebody else. If that's how you're casting, you're trying to see who's better, but I think that's probably when the idea of really trying to build relationships
Right.
became really more important, because I knew it was in my family, but when seeing it in other people's family and they didn't look anything like me or whatever, and the story was the same. When you
Mm-hmm.
talk to older people, it's all about who do I love and who loves me back,
Right.
And I was like, they can't all be wrong. They
Mm-hmm.
cannot all be wrong. And who will be there for me if I need them? Who? And I don't have anything for them. Who will be there?
Wow. Yeah, that's a question that we oftentimes don't ask enough of in our community, because we have to think about who's going to be there when we're in trouble and all of that. We've been going through this pandemic for about a little bit over a year and almost 2 months now. So I was wondering, how has this impacted both of your work? So I guess I'll start with Manny, but how has it impacted your work in writing the novel and also your journalism work? And then I'd also love to hear how it's impacted Regina, since she's a singer. And I know that I've definitely got friends in that space that are having a hard time finding gigs. And in some cases, they're doing virtual gigs. But how has it impacted the work that you've been doing, Manny?
I think in many ways it's made writing and selling a novel more difficult, more challenging, because if you look at marketing 101 for books, they tell you go talk at libraries, go talk at schools, do all these things, and you can do it to an extent virtually, but it's a totally different feeling when you're doing something in person. So I think the fact that everything was shut down for over a year, people could not go to bookstores to buy books. You certainly could not be speaking to high school students unless it was virtually. And I think the teachers all had their hands full with just trying to educate them from a distance perspective. So I think that it was probably not the best time to launch a novel, but when something's ready to be born, it's going to happen. And so it was time for me to complete the novel. On the plus side, it made it easier to write because there was no place to go. There was no place you could be distracted by. Actually, there is. I live in Palm Springs, California, and I don't know if you've ever been here, but it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. So some days I would say, I'm going to go ride my bike instead of riding. I'm going to go hiking for the day instead. So we still had diversions, but I think the pandemic did create new challenges as far as trying to get something to market. On the positive side, I don't know what your experiences have been, but I think it's made us all a little deeper as human beings. And I know that that has affected my writing and what I choose and desire to write about, because if the past year didn't teach you a little about humility and about what is important in life, and, push the whole reset on what am I doing with my life, then you probably were living with blinders on. But I think that all of us were confronted with so many challenging things and images, just the sheer size of what was going on a global perspective. I think it all forced us to reach a little deeper into ourselves and search a little more about what am I about and what do I really need to be on this planet for. So in that respect, I think it's helped my writing. So now that I've got book number 1 out of the way, I'm hoping that it's reflected more in book number 2. But I think because of the pandemic, I think we've all had an opportunity to really examine who we are as human beings, and hopefully we've learned some of the lessons, and I hope we don't forget them. I think it's going to continue being a challenge, but I don't know about you guys, but people seem to talk more to strangers and they're less afraid of each other now, I think. So I hope that stays with us.
Yeah, I definitely hope that stays with us. And I have noticed that. And it also seems like, in a lot of ways, because we were uh, coped up inside, I think it also got us to pay a little bit more attention to, ironically, Mother Nature, because Mother Nature was not coped up inside and was actually using this as a time to clean its own spirits. Because I know last year, it seems to me that the birds had more energy in their songs and everything because we weren't out there making as much noise and ruckus in our lives. And I know there were conversations last year when it first happened and it first came onto the scene that there were animals that were popping up in places that they hadn't seen in ages. I think there was like a seal that was seen somewhere in Europe, and a number of other animals that were showing up in places that had not been seen in the past. But Regina, how has it impacted your work?
Well, I think from my standpoint, it has made me more committed to do the things that I love, because I started late. Like I said, I started writing late and decided to start singing. Like it made me realize that I have to do this. And actually, February 23rd, I had given my first like one woman show, where I was singing and doing poetry and had book shows kind of booked throughout the year, and that fell off. And the blessing was it made me realize that I was on the right path, a path that I should be on. But it also made me start looking at some of the things that held me back or were how other people did not behave the way I thought they should or treat me like the way they should or whatever, and you realize that they're not my responsibility. Their thinking is not my responsibility. Their actions are not my responsibility. And sometimes we take on other people's stuff and it stops us from doing our stuff. And so it just really made me look at things differently in that respect. And I hear all the birds and I hear, nature doesn't make any mistakes from that standpoint, outside the birds and things. And life is good if we see the goodness. And then if that's what we decide that we're going to go in that direction and not the other, it just made me appreciate each and every day because there's so many people who didn't make it,
That's very true. What advice would you give this is for both of you, for folks that want to get into writing, particularly those that might decide that they want to write that great American novel or write that great American play or even do some great American poetry later in life? Because there are folks, of course, we've got a global audience and the audience is very diverse in the sense of different ethnicities, definitely both the genders as well as folks that may identify as non-gender or some of the other terms that are out there. And we definitely have folks of all ages, including some that are in the middle age and the elderly group and all of that. So what kind of advice would you give to folks that are thinking about jumping into this writing space?
Well, I'll go real quick. It's never too late because if you think I'm too old, you're going to be older tomorrow. So, okay. So as long as you have breath in your body and a desire, do whatever it is you feel like you must do. Done.
Great.
All right.
From my perspective, I read a statistic that there's something like 1 million books published a year because there's so many self-publishing opportunities now. So to me, the most important thing to be a good writer is you have to read. You have to read because you have to see how language is used to better understand how you can interpret that in your gift in practice. It's like that joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Lots of practice. You have to do that with writing. And I kept a journal for probably 20 years when I was younger. So I would encourage, start with a journal and read other authors, read what's of interest to you. And then you just need to be disciplined. That's the other most important thing, is you have to force yourself to sit at that keyboard and to kind of crank it out. So
Yeah.
Now, you had alluded to it, Manny, but I'd love to hear from both of you. The industry for a long time was very much corporate driven. Some people would even argue that it was monopoly driven, meaning that, like I know in the field of radio, there was Clear Channel, Radio One, and things of that nature. Definitely in the movies, there's the major players and all of that. Now, some folks are feeling that COVID and other things has opened things up, and there's more YouTube stars and all of that. But how do you feel that you were doing in terms of working with into that corporate environment in either publishing or music? And do you feel that it's opened up? Because definitely I know independents in all of the fields, whether it's writing, whether it's music, movies, or whatever, have always had a hard time because of those major players that are monopolies being kind of the gatekeepers. But now it seems like people have computers, they've got iPhones, they got a number of other ways that they can create. And it does seem like we're in a new age. I know I was talking to a friend of mine in his show. We were doing a special edition last night, and we had a comic book writer and a movie maker, and we were talking about whether there's a new renaissance. Some people may say a new Harlem Renaissance going on, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think that this is a new creative period that we're in the middle of, and is that actually opening the doors away from some of those corporate entities that were being very tight fisted with their control in the past?
Well, I'll start. I think that the playing field is becoming more level because of our access to kind of seek things out online. I think that creates greater opportunities for people. But I would encourage people to be their best. Don't just put anything up online. It's like we all here, see these YouTube stars, and it just amazes me that people get 10 million followers because they're dancing in 30-second clips on TikTok, and I'm like, how is this forwarding us as a human race? What is this doing to strengthen our brain power? So you can call that leveling out, but if you're going to be online, if you're going to do something online, put something of value, something of meaning to you, because I would much rather put something of quality on than quantity. The other thing is, and this is a byproduct of a lot of what has happened in the past year and a lot of the Black Lives Matters and stuff. If there's one positive to come out of that, I think it's forcing corporate America to reconsider their stance on the positioning of minorities within their organizations. From a publishing perspective, I think it's Penguin Publishing or Harper Row. They're starting a division just for diverse voices. So that all came about within the past year because they're starting to see corporate America saying, hey, these people have money. And that's what it boils down to. They buy things. So we need to start making them seen and heard more often. So I think corporate America is slowly starting to come around, and I hope that the doors don't shut again. I think it's up to us to keep them forced open and to keep plodding through those doors.
What's your thoughts, Regina?
I have to agree with everything Manny said. I said the thing that is different, though, is that because you do have the social media avenues that were not available, and that's a door if you learn how to use social media, because that's a whole nother learning curve. You can make it work for you. You have at least that door. Before, you just couldn't even get in the door. So you may not, so at least it opens up the door for you, but learning how to use it. So, and that may be the start, because you get a start. The door is not just shut and there's no way in, so we can slide in. If we can slide in, we just want to get in. And so
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just
yeah,
want to get in that door and everything.
we just want to get in, but quality, and knowing what it is that you offer and what you have for people is so important,
If I can add to that, the importance of online and social media, my website is manuelpadillaJr.com, and I write a monthly blog. It's called Poolside from PS, and so I use social media to get people to follow me on my website, and it does work, but it's a constant job. Once you get onto social media, the posts that I do specifically about Palm Springs, I'll have 300 people visit my website in a day to read those. And that I've sweated to get each one of those people to read that. So yes, you can use it, but it is constant work.
It's hard. Yes.
What is one of the most unique things that you've had on that blog and on that social media outlet that you've used and everything? And then I did have a question about the Black Lives Matter and the athletes' role in that. But first, I want to know what's one of the most unique posts that you've had, Manny.
Probably the one that got the most play is the 10 things that I've learned about Palm Springs. I moved here permanently full-time 2 years ago. And if you've ever gone to Palm Springs, it's kind of a resort community. Very hot. It gets to be 110, 120 in the summer. But what I put was, it's also a retirement community. So we have a lot of old folks living here. And there's certain things that gravitate with this crowd. It's like they love to talk online about coyotes. So I put on there that, there's a coyote sighting, and people are very fearful of them. They think they're going to steal their dogs and their kids and their grandkids and stuff. So that was probably the most popular comment. I made fun of some of the eccentricities of living in a retirement resort town. And, I got people sending me emails saying, can I buy a book about these because it's pretty funny? And it's like, nope, not yet. But yeah, when I'm talking about Palm Springs specifically, I get a lot of kudos from that from local people.
Well, I worked in a town similar to Palm Springs, but on the opposite side, and that was opposite side, I should say, and that was Boca Raton, Florida. I worked briefly for about 6 months at the Boca Raton News, and actually lived in Delray Beach and Deerfield during that brief time that I was there. And I found it to be a very fascinating environment because sometimes you would see things that were totally not expected. Because I know definitely there was the level roads and everything, because it was like you could drive miles on in and then not hit a hill and all of that. But at the same time, there was also even some what people would call the hood, but ironically, it was right next to the police force, and it was a very small area in that very ritzy area of Boca Raton and everything. So I'm sure that even in Palm Springs, there's probably a neighborhood that would be considered the hood, but it's probably very small and in a very contained area. Because I remember the one in Boca Raton, I don't know if it's still there. Like I said, that was the late 80s, but when I was there, it was definitely very contained, and it was also very near the police station.
And of course, crime was rampant, and the police did nothing to protect the citizenry, I'm sure.
Yeah, so definitely so unique when you find things like that and everything. For this is for both of you. What is your thoughts about, because a lot of times folks were being critical of our athletes, be that LeBron or others, when they were using their platform to speak about issues like what's going on in Minnesota now with the case. When at that time it was the George Floyd situation and everything. But definitely, what is your idea when either the WNBA or the NBA or NFL folks or Colin Kaepernick actually use their platform? I know we just lost a rapper recently, DMX, and a lot of folks would say that he used his own life to talk about what was going on in his world and everything. So I'm actually of the opinion that it can be a good thing and that they can even be sometimes our best reporters. But I was wondering your thoughts.
I love it. I think that if they decide to use their platform to let the world know about issues that are important to people, that the only reason that their eyes are on them because they have elevated themselves because of their skill,
right,
to a level where people who normally would not give them the time of day they're watching them now, and they say, this is a very skillful person. I love this person, whatever. And if they use that platform in a way that will open up the door, or at least let people know how other people are being affected, I give it to them, because they're showing how they're not selfish about it, because a lot of times they have put themselves in a place to be ridiculed, or lose followings and that kind of thing, so they're putting themselves at some kind of risk, but they really are opening up the door in the way that they can for the rest of us. I think it's a good thing.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. Now, the other thing that I sometimes hear people complain about, and of course we heard it with Michael Jordan, we've heard it from others as well, even sometimes LeBron, is there are sometimes folks who will think that they're not doing enough to uh, play it forward. Like they have made millions and made money and everything, but there are some that say that they're not doing enough to actually bring it back into the community. And I don't care what the community is, because you can even say the same thing about some of the famous Latin American baseball players and things along those lines, and Latin American boxers. So when you hear those kind of complaints, do you agree with them, or do you think that folks need to give them a break and let them do things? And sometimes they may be doing things that we don't even know what they're doing in their community or in the areas that they came from. So I was just wondering, do you feel that our entertainers and even our entrepreneurs that have made it are doing enough to bring others back with them? Because that's the old saying is, make it, but then also reach back and help somebody else up as you're going on that journey. So do you feel that there's enough of that going on?
You know what? I think that's something that each person has to decide what they're going to do, because some people don't even help people in their family.
Right.
And so who am I to tell somebody what they're supposed to do with what they have earned? The fact that they want to do it is really what we should take. And how much can you tell somebody? You have too much and you need to give this much to somebody. Some people have that heart. And so I that's a really hard place for me to judge. I can't judge anybody. I cannot judge anybody on that regard, because people have to do what they feel is right. And some people don't have the heart to be right anyway. All they know how to do is receive and take, and they have nothing to give. So I don't have anything for that person either.
Gotcha.
I think it's important to be of service, however you define service. If it's writing a check, then you can do that. If it's going out and speaking within the community, you can do that. If it's something that you write that's going to touch somebody, I think that's okay too. So finances are just one component of it. I think as long as you give something from your soul, I think that's the best you can do.
Right.
No, definitely agree with that. You got to give from your soul and all of that. And too often people are trying to make their own judgments about things. And like I said, sometimes they may be doing work that we're not even aware of what's going on in that regards. Manny, how are you feeling about the publishing in the sense of having enough Latin American publishing companies? Or would you like to see more of those? Or do you even possibly have the desire to start your own after the books take off and all of that? So definitely, where do you think we are in the sense of having representation on the publishing side, meaning those that are actually able to grab the books and put them out, but be Latin American represented or minority represented in general?
Well, when I was sending my novel out for literary agents to review, I think I got over 230 rejections. And I've written, like I said, for 35 years. So to me, it wasn't a question of writing. When I started to delve deeper, I'm like, wait a minute. All they seem to be interested in is vampires and time travel. And basically that's true, because that's what sells. So I think that the publishing world is very limited. They're going to sell what they can make money off of. And the obvious things are the vampires and all those other, books that are bought by the masses, of romance and all that. But yes, the amount of literary agents, I think there are probably less than 50 literary agents of Latinx of that were Latinos when I was searching it out, and they were very specific in what they were going to accept as far as what they would read. So there wasn't a great deal of that. I did not. I found maybe two or three agencies that were geared toward Latinos, and then of those, I think two of them really wanted Spanish language books. So it's a very small field. I think if I probably had another 40 years of my career, then I might consider becoming a publisher of that type of work. But like I said, I worked for 35 years. I did my work. So this is the icing on the cake. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And if I can set an example here and there, that is the best that I could hope for at this point in the game.
Yeah, that makes sense. Manny, what do you think is one of the strongest stereotypes people have about journalists in general and minority journalists in particular? Because I oftentimes am about shattering stereotypes. So, what are some of the stereotypes that you've had to encounter as a journalist, not just as a writer, but as a journalist?
Well, here's a good story for you. When I was a real estate editor at the newspaper, I used to go out and cover social events. So I would wear a tuxedo because they were black tie events. I would also have a camera around my neck because I would take pictures. So I was at one board of realtor events and I'm standing there and this guy came up to me and said, "Can you give me a scotch and soda?" And this was after I grew the mustache. And I looked at him and I said, "I'm an editor, not a waiter." And that's what happens because you start getting bitter after a while. And I had mentioned that I grew back a mustache and a beard once I got in a position of authority or once I was an editor, because it was really important to me at that point to make sure that people understood minorities can't be in these positions. And at that point, that's why I did all the public speaking in schools, because it was important for me to set that influence for young people. And now there's a lot more diversity in newspapers, and the online world has opened it up even further. There's tons of things you can do for Spanish language and things like that. But when I was doing it, I graduated in 1983. It was difficult because there weren't a lot of minorities in the field. And so I just said, I'm going to keep putting it out there so that people see that, hey, the minorities can make it in this field. So I was very fortunate.
Yeah, definitely very fortunate in that sense and everything. Regina, you've also done some coaching and everything. What is something about that that you have found to be fascinating and all of that? And how important do you think it is to have coaches? Because we've had a couple of business coaches and other types on here, but I was just wondering your thoughts about that aspect of your career as well.
I think we need assistance sometimes in moving to another level, because sometimes we get really caught up in where we are and we can't really see past that. And you use somebody else's experience, knowledge to get you to another space. And one of the things that I have found that I love working with people who are in their second half of life and starting all over again and trying to find that joy. A lot of people think, well, I'm too old. I missed out on doing those things, and so I don't really have an opportunity to do it. And they have all these fallacies of why they can't. And none of it is true. But the other thing is they're so used to, and especially with women, they're so used to having been there for everybody else. And sometimes they don't realize, and putting themselves like at the bottom of the list. Mm-hmm. And so they don't even know what being at the top of their own list looks like. And so being able to grab that space and then move forward into a new space that they never even really considered they could have, and it's a very hard space to go in. And it's even hard for men, so some men who've had a family and all they knew is work, and then it's like the kids are gone, the wife is gone, or maybe, our life is different. How do we maneuver? We don't even know how to really talk because the kids are gone and that's all we ever talked about. I don't even know who you really are anymore, other than, the things we do. And, so it's our lives are different, and being able to have a coach to get you past that point to a place where that you're dissatisfied with some aspects of your life. and get you to a place that where maybe you're living the life that you love, that's where I come in, and that's really what you need sometimes. And I've worked with coaches myself to get me past the point so I could believe that I could. I thought I could, but I was afraid to try. If you're afraid to put your foot in the water to see if you can swim, because last time you got in the water, you thought you were going to drown. You didn't, but you thought you would, and it scared you from even trying. You may be afraid to try again.
It's very true. A lot of times folks are afraid to just even give it that thought or give it that experience and everything. What is one of the lessons that your coaches have taught you that you still try to live by? And I'm sure that even Manny has got his own coaches and everything. So I'd love to hear from both of you your thoughts of lessons that you've learned from coaches or mentors. And to me, a coach is a mentor. So like I said, I'm using that term kind of interchangeably.
Oh my gosh. Probably the thing that I've had the most struggle with is I think that I'm all over the board, the creative aspect, and I enjoy that creativity and so I would think sometimes that I can't be that structured, which is not true because I'm very structured when I work and methodical when I do things, and practicing and commitment, and being able to realize that I take that same thing and put it in other areas. It just looks different and I call it different things. But it's all the same and making it work for me, and I couldn't see it for myself. And being able to have people understand that and then give them some of the things, the structure and the ability to see beyond my reality and be okay with it, and not having to be perfect. Yeah. Because I have that perfectionism thing bad. And being okay with, oh, well, I'll just fail and it's okay. And I'll just fail again and it's going to get a little bit better and it's going to be okay. And so, so it's just being able to trust yourself more. And some people say, I see it in you. Can't you see it? Can't you see it? And one day you're like, oh, I see it too. Yeah, I do see it, and being able to go for that. But sometimes you don't get that from your family because they see you another way.
Right.
It's
very true. What are some of the things, Manny, that you've learned from your mentors, and who are some of those mentors that you've had in your life, whether that's in the journalism career or in the other careers as well? And then I've got a somewhat abstract question to ask, but I'll get to that one in a second and all. But definitely, who are some of the mentors that you've had?
Well, when I was at the Daily News, my boss, she was probably my first mentor. And, back in the early 80s, I don't even think they use that term. So she was my manager as well. But as I mentioned earlier, is that I started out as an editorial assistant, and then I improved and became the reporter. And then from there, I started doing some editing. And then ultimately, as I said, I was a supervisor. I oversaw, I think, 7 employees, and I was a real estate editor. And that was all because of the guidance of my manager. Her name was Fran Crimston, and she just kind of took me under her wing and kept an eye on me and kind of pushed me and poked me and prodded me. And it's really hard to define, but I doubt that I would probably be where I am at in my life and career if not for that person guiding me. And it was very subtle. It was never, oh, sit down, we're going to have a 15-minute mentorship meeting. No, it wasn't like that. It was just her ongoing nurturing of my writing skill. And she also taught me a lot about humanity and the importance of being human in whatever it is that you do. So she kind of paved the way for that. And there's something that happens a lot. I don't know, it's a lot, I can't say that. But as a minority, a lot of times we have what's known as an imposter syndrome, where we don't automatically feel that we deserve what we get out of life, that we're really faking it. And at some point, somebody's going to find out that we're a fake and they're going to kick us back down the stairs. And it took me probably 10 to 15 years to appreciate that I was the person that got me to where I was in my career, and that I wasn't faking it, and that I did deserve to be there as much as the other people that were sitting in the room. And I think as minorities, because we have so many experiences when we're young and growing up where people tell you you're not good enough, that you can't do this, that there's no point in you trying because you're not going to achieve that goal, that it takes a while to get that out of your system so that you have that confidence in yourself. So I learned to be very self-driven. But my last job was with the Los Angeles Police Federal Credit Union. I was a marketing and business development vice president. And, you know, for a couple of years before I retired, I worked there for 12 years. I've been saying, oh, I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to write a novel. And, you know, when I would talk to my coworkers and to my fellow executive management, they're like, you know, you really should write that book. And then when the stock market did really well and it became feasible that I could actually stop working and write a novel, it was with their encouragement that I actually said, you know what, I'm going to retire now, even though it's not really retiring. And that's a little frightening when you've worked, because I started working when I was 11 years old. So when you work for that long to get to a point where you're 57 years old and say, okay, I'm going to stop doing this, and I'm going to become a novelist. I don't think if I hadn't had the encouragement of those people before I retired, and they were all in favor, they probably were glad to see me go out the door because I was probably a pain in the neck to work with. But, you know, they gave me the volition to take that step out the door and say, okay, I'm going to try something totally new at this point in life. So.
That makes a lot of sense. The abstract question that I had to ask you was, when I had done some research, I saw that there was two folks that had your name, and I know it could be like one of them cases of John Smith and everything, but one of them was a child actor and the other was a soccer player. So I was wondering whether you were related to either one of those, and if so, what the relationship was.
Okay, actually, I'm going to write a column at some point saying I'm not that Manuel Padilla Jr. There is a Manuel Padilla Jr. He was in the Tarzan movies in the early 50s, and he was in American Graffiti. No, he was in the 60s with Ron Ely, and he was in American Graffiti, and he was in a number of movies. So if you Google Manuel Padilla Jr., you're going to see this kid first. And it was really tough because, you know, when you're writing and stuff, you want people to be able to find you easily on the internet. So I always have to tell them, Google Manuel Padilla Jr. writer. And over the years, I would get calls because I lived in Los Angeles, you know, Hollywood, the entertainment capital of the world. I would get calls from agents saying, hey, Manuel Padilla Jr., I've got a good gang member role for you. And so I'd say, oh, tell me about it, you know, and they would go through how, yeah, you're going to be the leader of this gang, blah, 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 blah. And so I'd say, well, I'll be happy to take on the role, but I'm not that Manuel Padilla Jr. And I think what took the cake was one day I came home to my apartment and there was a 3-page letter tucked in my front door from an admirer saying how he wanted to take care of me and that we were destined to be together and that he was in love with me ever since the Tarzan movie. Kind of creeped me out. I think that's when I took my name out of the white papers back when we had phone books. So yes, Google Manuel Padilla Jr. writer if you want to find out about me.
Gotcha. Regina, if folks want to find you, do you have any encounters with celebrities or other things along your line? And also, how can they find you if they're interested in learning more about the various things that you're doing? And when is that road show going to hit the road? Because like I said, they are saying that we're loosening things up, and they are saying that things are starting to be loosened. I know that even locally, there have been some clubs that have started opening. Of course, they're having to maintain social distancing and don't have the same size of whatever their audience was, but there are some efforts to get people back into performance spaces. I don't know that we'll have the full spaces even in Broadway for another year or two in my mind, but how are you feeling about that, and when are you hoping to be on the road?
Well, okay, first of all, I do have a website. It's reginagale.com, and you can find my information there. And my books are available on Amazon and reginagale.com. Oh, well, Regina Gale. And sometimes you might see Regina Gale Dozier because that was my married name. And my Regina Gale, how I got that name was because Gale is actually my middle name. And when I was growing up, when my mother would call me and I was in trouble, she would say, Regina Gal, come here. Regina Gal, right now. And so I knew she meant business. So when I decided to have a business, it was going to be Regina Gal.
You knew you were in trouble when you got called both names. I know that feeling.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And as far as being back, going on the road or trying to pull the one woman show, I'm starting to look at it now seriously, because things are starting to kind of open up. I've been writing some material and new songs, and that will go with it. And I'm just kind of anxious. I got both my shots, but I'm still basically not doing anything other than getting excited when I go to the grocery store, because that's like I get to see people.
And I think the grocery store has become everybody's new social outlet and everything of that nature, which actually is ironic, because I remember that I have a younger brother, and my two nephews, this was long before they were born and everything. But when he was in college and he did that long range college program, they would have this expression that they called going Krogering. And basically that meant that you would go to Kroger late night, because Kroger's here would stay open late, and you would basically be there basically scouting what women were there also shopping late as well. So it was kind of like the pickup location is what it amounted to.
Oh, that is too cute. That is too cute. But, I think I've been thinking about actually putting material together, but really need to start planning where to do it and start reaching out, just start reaching out. So if you know some places, let me know. So
well, I'm gonna have to check and see whether, I don't know if you've ever come. There's a major theater festival here that has been going on for years, and that here being North Carolina, the National Black Theater Festival. And I haven't looked to see whether they're gonna actually have it this year, because it's always in the odd year. So they would not have had it last year, because when we started this pandemic, that was an even year. But it's usually held in the fall and summer of, well, actually it's just 1 month, but usually around late summer, early fall is that time that it is held here in North Carolina at Winston-Salem. And definitely, I know they were planning to still have it before the pandemic, but I need to reach out to folks and see if that's going on, because they have everything from established works and established theater pieces to what they call readers theater. And readers theater is little people reading their plays with actors, sometimes professional actors, and actually most of them are either professional or college actors, but they're reading with script in hand, but they're also doing the whole narration and everything else. So that's been going on for a number of years and is quite popular, and it started off as I think a midnight series, but it became like the entire day. So they do them all day doing that 1 week long festival. So I have to find out if it's going on or it's going to be like so many things and go virtual, because I've also been a judge of a couple of film festivals, and they pretty much all went virtual last year and are still going virtual now, even though I'm hearing some things that are actually going to be live and in person. So maybe we'll have some live entertainment. Matter of fact, I know there's some live bands playing. So definitely, hopefully there'll be more and more live entertainment, and we can see Regina perform somewhere in the very near future and all.
Yeah, I do miss being in front of people. Oh my gosh, I do. Yeah,
what is one of the best things that you love about being a performer? Because you are also a singer and all of that, but what is some of the things that you love most about being a performer?
Just the connection with people. I think when I'm performing, it gives me an opportunity to let down all inhibitions and just show up and be raw. And when I say being raw, it just means they get all of me, because there's nothing held back. And there is nothing like that. It just isn't. I don't even know how to explain it. Sometimes it's like, I don't lose who I am. It's just that I'm just there with you. I'm just there with you. And I don't get that feeling anywhere else. And that even is just, even when I'm reading my poetry, sometimes it's like, if I'm just there and there's an audience there, I just jump into it. It's just like this love that comes out, that like, I'm supposed to be here. I have something for you. And I just don't even know how to describe that feeling, and I think probably other artists feel that same way, because when you have that feeling, for me, it's not even scary. It's scary when you get started. Sometimes you're like, oh, I hope they like me. I hope they, I hope I can connect with them. And then when you get started, all of a sudden you're in this space. And I just don't even know how to explain it well.
Yeah. Gotcha. Manny, what's the draw of being a writer for you? Like I said, you've been doing this both as a journalist and now in that novel space. So what's the draw of being a journalist as well as a creative writer for you?
I think as far as being a journalist, it was being able to, I've always been a curious person, and it was being able to write about things that people might have interest in or want to learn more about. And, certainly when you're interviewing people, you meet a lot of interesting characters, and writing has always been part of who I am. And there's a connection that happens when I put pen to paper, and it's like this other person comes out from within me, and I don't know where he goes to the rest of the time, but when I'm writing, it's like a whole other being takes over, and it's wonderful. When I wrote the novel, I actually was sad when I finished writing because I had actually had these characters in my brain for about 25 years. And I had been, for 25 years, I was mulling over how is this novel going to come together. And when I sat down and wrote, it was actually, the writing only took me like 4 months to get the first draft, because I had already played out the story so many times in my mind. But it was being able to put flesh on the bones of the characters and seeing them come to life. And in the book, one of the characters dies, not a main character, but I remember when I wrote it, I started crying, and I'm like, why are you crying? This, you're just writing about characters. And it was like, you're giving a piece of you on paper, that people are seeing your insights. And I feel truly blessed to be able to do that. So when I finished the novel, it was kind of like having a little bit of a funeral, because I was having to say goodbye to something that had been part of my psyche for so long. And then I got excited about being able to sell it and market it to people. And now when I get compliments from people saying they love the book and it brought back memories, and you wrote about exactly how I was growing up, that says to me, we're not alone in this planet, and so many stories that we have, we share in common. It's just, is somebody going to put it on paper so that you can encounter it? So that's what I enjoy about writing now, is that it's the freedom of being able to express, these people and things inside of me. So.
That makes a lot of sense. How do you, because I hear oftentimes writers and musicians talk about that muse, and it sounds like that's what you were just talking about just then and everything. So how do you get in touch with that muse? Because I know a lot of times folks are fascinated by that whole creative process. So I was just wondering, how do you what do you do to get in touch with your inner muse? And then I'm going to ask Regina the same question.
Well, it's interesting because I wrote professionally for so long. You have deadlines, especially being a newspaper editor, you learn deadlines. So you find that muse real quickly. When you have to get a newspaper out the door, you're going to discover that muse when you need to. So I learned very quickly to turn the on and off switch on. And people are like, oh, have you ever had writer's block? I'm like, no, because I needed to get a paycheck. And if I had writer's block, I was going to lose that job. So it was something that I learned. As far as a novel writing, it's a different type of creativity and a different type of muse. But because I was so used to being disciplined writing for so long, that it was really easy for me to sit there for hours at a time and work on the novel. And there's something about creating the structure of a sentence, of a paragraph, of a chapter, that it's just fascinating to me that we have this gift in our brains to be able to put this information together in a way that is going to touch and move people. So that is kind of, the muse always lets itself be known in the back of my head that I'm here, just let me out and let me go.
Yeah. I have to agree with
that. What were you saying, Regina?
I was going to say, I have to agree with that. It was just a matter of being able to, just like clockwork, you just did it, like you just showed up. You're like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna write about today. And you just, well, you can't go anywhere until you write. And then it just comes. And, the amazing thing is something just takes over when you just start writing and being able, and probably you have the same thing, Manny. I look back on some things that I've written and I'm like, did I write this? Wow, that came from me.
Hmm.
And it's like, I don't even think like that, do I?
So it actually puzzles you as well. Wow, that's fascinating. Because one of the things that I know that too often people get caught up in, I know that I've had friends, and I would even argue myself have been caught up in this. But Manny, you're in that position where you're retired, so it's not as much of an issue for you. But what advice do you give to folks that have lots of creative ideas, creative juices, and whatever, but they feel that they are stuck between a rock and a hard place because they still have to take that job in order to pay the bills? Because we know a lot of folks, actors and actresses, writers, maybe even the person that's got the next great American novel that's sitting there working at Kroger's and everything because they got to pay the bills and all of that. So what is some of the advice that both of you would give to folks that are having their career? Because to me, there's a difference between a career and a job. Their career, which is their creative love and everything, and their job that they've got to have to pay the bills.
Do you want to go first?
Well, I think we make time in our lives for anything that's important. And so you may not have 8 hours a day, but you do have 15, 30 minutes a day. And if you wanted to go to a party or something like that, or anything you wanted to do, you're going to make time. And so you have to look at what's important to you. And if you say that writing or dancing or painting, anything that's not your job, but that is calling you, then you allow a little bit of space in it. And then as you have that space, if you need more space, you're going to find a way for it. This is just like anything else in life.
I think,
Makes sense.
yeah, I think that if you're destined to do it, you're going to find a way to do it. If it has to come out of you, it's going to find a way to surface. What I would encourage people that have jobs or careers that want to become writers, again, as Regina said, it's like you have 15 minutes during the day when you get home from work. I don't encourage writing professionally and trying to write a novel at night, because after you've written for 9 hours a day, you go home, the last thing you want to do is write some more. Right. So if you're going to write a novel or something that takes that mindset, it's probably not best to do it when you have a professional writing job. But if you don't, then you have breaks throughout the day when you're taking a walk. You can be formulating ideas. Write everything down. That's really important, is that I have notes all over the place of ideas, and so that helps keep your mind focused on what your ultimate goal is going to be. But practicing every day writing something, I think, is important, and reading.
Yeah, because one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of times folks will have multiple careers. I know that my dad is actually in the middle of what I would argue is his fifth or sixth career, and that's actually as a artist. And he does everything from photography to what some people would call like sound art and other kinds of art like that and everything. But he's been doing this now in the latter part of his life, because he was also now a retired professor, and he was involved in the civil rights movement, did some radio work himself and everything, and then he's had one or two other careers in there, including being involved with a farm environment and everything. So he did some farm work with Andamule and all of that. It was the name of the organization. It was kind of a farming co-op. But definitely, I know he's quite happy with his artwork, and it's got pretty good regional recognition. I don't know if it's quite national, but he definitely has regional recognition and is very well known here in the area and everything. So definitely, I agree with y'all that it could happen at any point. You might decide that you're going to get that great American novel, and you might write it when you turn 70 or 80 or 90 or something like that. It might happen after you've had the career in whatever that career is and everything. And it also seems like it doesn't always have to be about what you were done, what field your work is in, because I've seen some writers that have done work that had nothing to do with what their life was about. So if they were doing fiction, it might be about something totally outside of their personal experiences, but they've had some interest in whatever that was. Who are some of the Manny? You mentioned just really quickly with the journalism background. Who are some of the news stories that you did that really touched you in your journalism career? As I'm sure, like me, you probably had some encounters that really touched you in that field. It might have been something about a disaster, like maybe you helped somebody in that was struck in like a fire or something like that, or it might have been in that fame and fortune circle and everything. But what are some of the stories that have touched you that you still reflect on when you think back on your journalism career?
When I was still in college, I had an internship at a paper that is now defunct, like so many, called the Burbank Daily Review. And they sent me out to cover a fire. And I'll never forget it because I was standing out in front of this house and the owners had escaped the house and they were on their front lawn crying. And I had to interview them and get a quote. And of course, you're going to ask them, "Oh, your house is on fire. How does that make you feel?" And I remember at that point saying to myself, okay, you're going to have a really tough skin if you're going to want to be in this business, because who knows what's going to be the next fire or what have you. And I remember I got the quote that I needed out of them and I wrote the story, and it became clear to me that it's like, if you're going to be a journalist, you have to have a certain mettle to you. And so I kind of carried that throughout. When I was at the Daily News, I wrote a tri-weekly column called Almost Old Enough. I was in my 20s. And so this column focused on the experience of a 20-something-year-old. And sometimes the columns would get kind of personal. And I remember my dad passed away suddenly, and I wrote a column about it and we published it. And I remember my boss, who was also my mentor, she asked me, "This is really personal. Do you want to put this out to the public?" And I said, sure. At that point I was still numb and in shock, but I wrote from the heart in that. And so we published a piece and I got more response to that. I'll never forget it because people were calling me, crying on the phone saying, "You touched me so much because that's how I felt when my parent passed," and things like that. And I think that was probably when I realized how powerful words can be and written words could be. So I had enough of those experiences throughout my career to keep me going. And as I said, I feel very blessed to have had the career that I had, and also very fortunate to be able to be doing what I love now.
Yeah, definitely. What are some of the experiences that you haven't shared yet that you like to share with us, Regina, just in your corporate world and all of that? Because I know that sometimes that can also be a fascinating world as well. I know that one of our co-founders comes out of that engineering space, and she talks about the fact that she hates that we're in the 2021 era, and we still have to deal with the glass ceiling, even in corporate America. And I'm sure that you've had to deal with that as both a definitely a woman and an African American woman. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about just where we are in terms of the glass ceiling and all of that, because I know Kim Calhoun, who is one of the founders along with Nick Palveda, has definitely made that one of her topics that she loves to talk about.
Yeah, I think that, well, when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, when I first got in the pharmaceutical industry, I remember my boss telling me as we were training that first week, after I'd gone through regular training, and then he was taking me out in the field. And I was the only African American in my company on the West Coast. And I was a female, and they didn't have many females. And he proceeded to tell me that most women, they only got the job and made sales with doctors if they wore like loose blouses, and basically, were loose women and stuff like that. And I'm like, what an idiot boss that I am going to be working with, and that I needed to be wearing this blue suit. Well, I'm not the blue suit kind of girl. Okay. I'm not the blue suit kind of girl. So I just didn't fit that thing. And what I realized is that I could be me as long as I knew how to bring value to the job. And that's what I did. I know how to help somebody grow their business. I knew how to tell the doctors the truth. I knew how to tell the doctors, I don't know that information. You're asking me, but I'll have it for you tomorrow, you know, that kind of thing. And so I built up the trust. And that was just very unheard of. And then I remember other things in corporate saying, well, we can't really find that many qualified Black people, like I was so lucky, and they found me. And I'm thinking, they got Berkeley, Oakland, they have so many qualified people who are, it's just that they're not looking, and they were not looking at that time. And it's not like I'm any more special than anybody else. It's just that I had found a way to open the door, get in the door by chance. And so, that was just very, very hard. Or as a woman, I remember sometimes going through calls, and they say, what did you do for the day? We'd have these calls, and then the men would say, I made like the 7 calls I was supposed to make today, but they didn't say the 7 calls I made today. That I made 7 calls. And I'm thinking, we're not even supposed to be talking about that, because that's like the minimum we're supposed to do. And they would act like when a man would say some of these things, that it was a big deal. And if a woman were to say something like that, they have different expectations. So, there was always that thing in the corporate world a lot. But, luckily, a lot of that has changed. A lot of that has changed. What I did learn as well, and some of the experiences that I will hold on to, is some of the specialties that I was able to work in. Like I was a derm specialist for a while, and I learned a lot of things about skincare that were important to me, because as a woman, it's like, I want to look cute as I get older,
Yeah.
and I want to know what they know. And I had some phenomenal plastic surgeons and dermatologists show me things that I just couldn't learn from a book, that I've been able to incorporate in some of the products that I make for myself and other people, those kinds of things. And so, I've learned a lot from the corporate world, but there are a lot of things and places that I just didn't think that I was going to be able to go. And I don't know. I think we all learn a lot through life, and it's just how we decide to use it. And there's a lot of things that I know that I have not used, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to use them going forward. And so I just really am grateful for every opportunity that I've had in corporate, whether it worked for me there or not. Maybe it wasn't supposed to work for me in corporate. Maybe it's supposed to work for me outside of corporate. That's how I know.
Might have to use it outside of corporate, like you were saying, and everything. I would know that before we get ready to wrap everything up, that folks would love to hear, if at all possible, works from both of you and everything. And then as part of the online dinner party, we have this thing that we do where we have like a group of quiz questions that come across and everything. And I have not been putting those across the screen, but I'm going to do that now. And folks that are watching, they can try to guess who these mystery people were, will be, and everything. And they stay all the way till the end, or if they're watching now and they want to post in on their comments or on our Facebook and other pages who the folks are, then they can tell us. But I know that this was National Poetry Week, so I told folks last week when I didn't do it that I would have 2 poets, one African American, one non-African American, as well as 2 folks from the world of sports. And I also knew that this was apparently National Autism Month as well, so I need to find one of the athletes to be somebody that dealt with autism. So did a little bit of research, found all of the stuff that I needed to do on my side and everything. So I'm going to put those across the lovely ticker and everything as I'm continuing my conversation and all of that. So as folks are watching, they can hopefully do that and everything. But Regina, in the meantime, if you've got one of your works and everything, but I'll also share a little bit about the first poet. And this particular poet was named after Confederate General Robert E. Lee. So this particular poet was named after Confederate poet Robert E. Lee and all of that. So that's who this particular person was named after and all of that. He was also a college dropout. He actually dropped out twice over. So he was a college dropout twice over. So he was a college dropout definitely twice over in that respect and everything. And he attended Dartmouth for just 2 months. So if folks are listening, they can know that he attended Dartmouth for just 2 months, and he later explained, "I wasn't suited for that place." And then he got his second chance in 1897 at Harvard, but only made it 2 years before dropping out to support his wife and children. They cannot make a student of me here, but they gave it their best. So I know a lot of folks can probably relate to that. And they later bestowed honorary honors upon him in 1937. And as a established poet with a following, Ezra Pound exposed him to a much larger audience by writing rave reviews of his poetry collection, A Boy's Wheel. So that's a little bit about this particular person. And like I said, I'll be giving other clues as well. Matter of fact, one of his works is entitled The Road Not Taken, which is often read at high school and college graduations as a reminder to forge new paths, but he never intended it to be taken so seriously. It was actually written as a private joke with one of his good friends and all of that. So that's a little bit of the clues about this particular person and all of that. So, and he also adopted an bucolic life when he was living in a 30-acre farm in Derry, New Hampshire, and his neighbors weren't exactly impressed with his farming skills. So, even though he's a farmer, they were not impressed with his skills, and he inspired George R.R. Martin as well. So that's some of the clues of one of the poets that I'm looking for and all of that. And he also won top awards in the poetry. A whopping 4 times he won the Pulitzer. He won for New Hampshire, A Poem with Notes and Grace Notes in 1924, Collected Poems, A Further Range, and A Witness Tree. So those are the ones that he won the Pulitzer for. And I believe that it still is the fact that he's the only one that has won that many. So I think that he still holds the record in that regards. And the inscription on his tombstone is in his own words. I had a lover's quarrel with the world. It's the last line from his poem, The Lesson for Today. So he said he had a lover's quarrel with the world, and I'm sure many folks can relate to that. And of course, we'll give a couple of this person's quotes as well. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And he also said, these woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So that's one of the work that he's known for. And I love this quote. He said, in 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. So it just goes on. That's what he said about life. It just goes on. Earth is the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to get any better. So that's something else that this particular person said as well. And they said, that I think Gina probably can relate to, says poetry is when an emotion has found its thought and the thoughts have found words. So poetry is when emotion has found its thoughts and the thoughts have found words. And last but not least, home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. So that's some of the quotes. Oh, I guess I'll give the one about education too. Education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or your self-confidence. So that's just a little bit about one of our 4 mystery guests, and I'll bring up the pictures later on and everything. But definitely that's some of the things that that particular person said and all of that. So let me, Gary, take that off. And Regina, you got any more works that you would like to share of your work in the world before I get to the other poetic person?
I will read you. My book's called Sometimes He Buys Me Grapes, my first book, and this poem is called Sometimes He Buys Me Grapes. Okay?
All right.
My very best friend had the nerve to say, he doesn't do a thing for you. It's always about him, and him. Why do you stay? I looked at her as she challenged me, wanting me to stand up and see that I was holding on to a hope that had seen better days. So in defense, I opened my mouth and I belligerently blurted out, sometimes he buys me grapes. That was all I could say. That was the best that I could say. I looked at her. She looked at me. She rolled her eyes at me. Then with clenched teeth and a sarcastic tone in her voice, she asked, were they seedless grapes or grapes with seeds? Were they red grapes, green grapes, or black grapes? Because you know it makes a difference. Annoyed, I said, "Who the hell cares what kind of grapes they were?" I looked at her. She looked at me. And we both burst out in uncontrollable laughter because the only good thing I had to say about him was, sometimes he buys me grapes.
Wow. Love that. Manny, you got any more work that you want to share from your book that we can get from you as well?
Yeah, there's a part in the book where one of the characters goes to the Hollywood Bowl. And as I mentioned, this family is a lower middle class family. They're just meat and potatoes. And so the son goes to see a performance at the Hollywood Bowl, and he realizes what a dichotomy there is in his life, the desire to be something more, to be creative, to be around culture versus what he is actually exposed to. As he stood out on the cool evening air on Highland Avenue awaiting his father's, Ori's feet were still floating 10 feet above the ground. He had never before been to a classical music concert, and although he realized he probably needed some practice on when it was appropriate to clap, he felt the music to be quite beautiful and moving. His father pulled up in a Chevrolet truck and ushered Ori in. "How was the show?" "It was good. Classical music is actually pretty good. I always thought that it was something people listen to when they wanted to go to sleep, but it isn't. It was actually kind of exciting." Ori responded animatedly. "Plus, the Hollywood Bowl is really cool, and people have picnics with candles and wine. Why haven't we ever gone there? It's not that far from the house." "Well, I never thought about it," his father said. "I figured since they played high-end music, it would be too expensive. Plus, they don't really know anything about that kind of music, so I figured you kids would be bored. That music isn't really for the kind of people like us."
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Deep. That's a great piece and everything. And where can folks get the book and everything if they're interested in getting that particular book, your first novel? And when are you expecting the second novel to be out?
Okay. Coconut, brown on the outside, white on the inside, is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple Books, Google Play, Kobo, and BookBub. So you would Google Manuel Padilla Jr. Coconut, and then you will be able to find me. I've just started work on the second novel, and my goal is to go a traditional publishing route. So this one's going to be more mainstream, and it will probably come out within the next 2 years. And it's about a little boy who his father gets sent back to Mexico, and he figures if he learns magic, he can make his father reappear and come back home.
Oh, wow. What a touching story and everything. Would you recommend folks actually try to do the independent publishing if they wanted to write a book, or if they want to put the book out and everything? Or do you actually think that it is better to go the more established literary houses, whether that's Random House or Penguin or one of the other bigger houses? What is your suggestion, and what do you think is the best route, Manny?
I would take a look at what's selling on the bestseller list before you decide. Again, what the publishing houses are interested in are things where they can make the most amount of money. What I've discovered is that it has very little to do with the quality of a book. It's how big an audience can they reach, because that's how they're going to make the most profit. So if you're writing a mainstream book, especially something that's topical and in the news now, you're probably going to have greater success obtaining a literary agent and going the traditional publisher route. What I found was I tried that other route. It also takes anywhere from 2 to 4 years to get a book traditionally published. So if you're like me and you don't want to wait that long, and you're confident in your skill set, then you can go self-publishing. It took me 2 years to get the first novel completed and out. It was a great learning experience, which I wouldn't trade for the world. But you have to be fairly tenacious and fairly creative to get it out. So that'd be my best advice.
Yep. Regina, what is your thoughts about that? Do you think that it's important to have the agent, the manager, and people like that as part of your team? Or do you think it's best to do it independently yourself and not have as big a team? Some people have small teams, some people are solos, and some people have like the super teams. So like I said, what is your approach, and what do you think is the best approach?
I think that's something that you have to decide for yourself. From what I've seen, I self-published. I self-published. I don't have a team. I didn't have a team of people working for me. And I didn't have a name that people would just recognize like this. Now, if you have a name that's recognizable, you can easily get a deal because, that's going to sell. Just the name sells. And that's what I was told. What kind of following, that's what they want to know. What kind of following do you have? How many people are going to buy your book? Just for, so basically that's it. And I had what I thought was some great stuff that I wanted to get out now. And if a publishing company wants to pick it up, they can do that too, and there's better stuff than that's still inside here, but I think it depends on you. How soon do you want it out, and what are your goals for it? I just had a message. I wanted it out.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. I'm gonna put both of the writers on the spot and everything because I'm gonna give the clues for the other person as well, and then I've got the sports people. But this person was the first African American and the third woman in America to publish a book. She was the first African American woman to make a living from her writing, and her writing was so exquisite that Bostonians did not believe she was the author of her work. She actually had to go before a panel of 17 notable Bostonians who actually verified her writings. She was named for the slave ship that brought her to America. So she was named for that slave ship that brought her here. And historians believe that she was born around 1753 in Western Africa in either modern day Gambia or Senegal. And they say she was frail and had poor health during her entire life. She died at a very young age of 31. And she was a precocious learner, definitely doing a lot of learning. She learned English, Latin, Greek, and English literature. The Bible was her favorite book. She was reading the Bible within 18 months of her arrival in America. So shortly after she got here, within like a year and a half, she was reading the Bible and everything. At 14, she published her first poem, which was entitled On Master's Hussey and Coffin in the Newport Mercury. And her book of poems, poems on various subjects, religions, and morals, was first published in London and then was financed by Selma Hastings, the Countess of Huntington. And publishers in Boston actually refused to publish the book by a slave. And she was invited to George Washington's house for a private reading of her poem to His Excellency George Washington. So it's actually a poem that she wrote about George Washington himself and everything. And these are some of the quotes that she said. She said, "In every human beast, God has implanted a principle, which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance." And she also said, "The world is a severe schoolmaster, for its frowns are less dangerous than its smiles and flatteries, and it is a difficult task to keep in the path of wisdom." And last but not least, she said, "Since my return to America, my master has, at the desire of my friends in England, given me my freedom." So that's what this particular person said, and everything along those lines. Actually, I'll give you one more quote. She said, "Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide." So that's one of the other quotes that this particular person had as well, and all of that. So, like I said, that's two folks from the poetry land. I'll be bringing up some stuff about our sports folks as well, and I don't see anything on my comment section. So, do my guests that have been here with me all this afternoon have any idea who those two particular poets might be and all of that? So like I said, one was one poet and the other was another, but do you have any idea who those particular poets might be and all of that?
Robert Frost.
You are correct. That was Robert Frost for the first one. So Robert Frost was the first one. What about the second one?
Phyllis Wheatley.
Yes, Phyllis Wheatley. Exactly. Phyllis Wheatley is the other one. That is very correctly. So y'all were both right in everything. So y'all did good. So sometimes folks do better in the show than they do in the audience and everything. So like I said, we always have fun with that aspect. One of the things that I always do before we get off the show and everything, and then I'll bring up my two sports folks as well is we always have folks that are given a word of wisdom, a word of encouragement, a word of positivity. We try to do this on just about the majority of our shows. So if you have anything that you would like to share with our audience and everything, we would love to hear that from you as well. So definitely share with folks some of your positivity and your wisdom that you like to share, and any other things that you might want to just share in general. So, Manny, I'll start with you.
Okay, in my acknowledgments in coconut in the back, this is how I ended, and I think it's very appropriate. This book is for all the little and not so little people out there who don't fit into any mold, whose skin might be a different color, who may think or act differently, who fear they'll never find their rightful place, or who've been told they're not good enough. Your presence and spirit are very much needed on this planet. History has shown that it is the ones we couldn't possibly perceive as having any worth. It is they who provide this world with its greatest gifts. Keep up the fight.
Great. What about yourself, Regina?
I would have to say, for all of the people who have spent their lives fulfilling the dreams of everyone else, and that's a good place to be, because no, you did it out of love.
Right.
And now it's time to learn how to love yourself and go after some of those things that you want to do, so that you can feel that fulfillment that you may be missing, because there are things for you that maybe it wasn't your time. Sometimes your time is to love other people and support other people. And now it's time to support
Right.
yourself. And we get to do that. And it's never too late to go after some things you want, They just may look differently.
Yeah, that's very true. And I definitely appreciate both of you being on. Like I said, I'm going to get to the sports people right now really quick. One of them said, I never was content unless I was trying my skill or testing my endurance. He also said, I am no more proud of my career as an athlete than I am of the fact that I am a direct descendant of that noble warrior, Chief Blackhawk. And the Yankees, you see, this is a quote he said, the Yankees, you see, they're a money team. They're the class of baseball. You don't ever have to bet against that. So they were a fan of some way or another of the Yankees. And they also said, I have always liked sports and only played or run races for the fun of things. And another quote that they said was, I give them the hip, then I take it away. And he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame back in 1963. So a long time ago, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and his best season as a baseball player was his last, when he had a 327 batting average, and he was voted the greatest American football player of the first half of the 20th century. And he was also a member of the Saw and Fox Nation, where he became the first Native American to win a gold medal for the United States. And his native name was Wadahawk, which means bright path. So definitely that was his native name that he had, and all of that. He also had a twin brother who unfortunately died when they were just 9 years old. It took him a while to settle into school, and he kept running away. So even though he was a runner, he also kept running away. His father sent him to boarding school when he returned in 1904. At the age of 16, he decided to go to the Indian Industrial School. And at college, he was famous for beating the high jumping record on the spot as he walked past and joined in. So he wasn't even part of the team. He just happened to pop in and join in. And he competed in football, baseball, lacrosse, and this one actually surprised me. He also competed in ballroom dancing. And even though he had never tried it before and was part of a bigger event, he actually finished third in the javelin, even though he had never tried it before. And like I said, that was part of a bigger event because he was competing as part of the pentathlon and the decathlon, which at that time were new sports. And he actually, in a national championship game, scored a ridiculous amount of points because he scored some 198 points, including 25 touchdowns. And this is the giveaway. A lot of folks will probably remember him because he had his medals stripped of him because he had been paid for playing sports and was therefore not an amateur according to Olympic standards. So that's what folks that we're looking for in all of that. So that's a little bit about this particular person. He began learning to swim, hunt, trap prey, and ride horses when he was 3 years old. And I love giving quotes. So one of the quotes was, "I wasn't content until I was trying my skill in some game against my fellow playmates or testing my endurance and wit against some members of the animal kingdom." And during the 1912 Olympic Games, King Gustav V of Sweden told him, "Sir, you are the greatest athlete in the world." So he was seen as the greatest athlete in the world in that early part of the 1900s and all of that. So no left from the audience. So either one of you, before we give you to tell where you can find your information in terms of social media and all of that, and before we get to the last one, which is the athlete with autism that I don't expect anybody will get, but do you have any idea who that might be?
I saw the made-for-TV movie. It's Billy Mills.
Nope, not Billy Mills. Any idea, Regina?
I'm clueless. Totally
You're clueless?
Clueless.
Jim Thorpe.
Oh, Jim Thorpe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
it's Jim Thorpe. That's who that was and everything. The last one, and then we'll get to your social media, was the one that I said I was going to try to find somebody that was sports related with autism. So this surfer was formerly diagnosed with Asperger, labeled as a less severe form of autism when he was 18 years old. Even though someone may think that this prevented him from doing sports, he proved everyone wrong by becoming a master on the surfboard and earning a reputation in the surfing world. So this is somebody that's modern, by the way. And Just Add Water is his signature film, which introduced him to a broader audience and which inspired many others to not give up on their dreams. So definitely, and he also said that the reason he continues to surf is because he feels more at home in the water than on land. And I'm sure many a surfer can definitely agree with that. And he is now considered one of the world's best free surfers who found his surface and peace in the water. And this is one of his quotes that he said. He said, "If there was no such thing as barrels, I probably would even surf." And last but not least, he said, "Waves are toys from God." So he said, waves are toys from God. So that's what this particular individual said and all of that. And I do find every once in a while some very obsolete folks that folks might have a hard time guessing and everything. But do you want to take a stab at who that might be as well?
Yep.
I'm gonna pass on y'all that one. I don't blame them, but I'm getting ready to bring up the pictures. One of them as a surfer and all of that. But the like I said, the original person was Jim Thorpe that I was talking about earlier, and that's some pictures of Jim Thorpe and all that I just brought onto the screen and everything. But this particular person that I was referring to in this case was none other than a gentleman by the name of Clay Marceau. Clay Marceau is the surfer, and this is actually a picture of him doing some of those stunt surfs and all of that. So Clay Marceau was the person that I was looking for in that regard. So that's one of the things that we do on the online dinner party is we have our mystery guests in addition to our regular guests. And I've had two great guests with Regina and Manny. So as we get ready to head off and everything, one of the things that I always like folks to do is tell folks how they can be reached through social media, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or any of the other ways that folks can reach you if they're interested in reaching you. So definitely share with the audience ways that folks can get in touch with you. And I'll start with you. Guess I'll go with Manny again and then end with Regina and everything. So Manny, how can folks reach you on social media?
Actually, probably the easiest way would be to go to manuelpadillajr.com. That's MANUEL PadillaJR.com. And you can click on my homepage. It'll take you to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm on all of them.
Sounds good. What about you, Regina?
Same thing. You can go to my website, reginagale.com. And there you will be able to find every link from Facebook to Instagram to my the books on Amazon, everything. there. And you can even see a couple of videos with some singing and stuff like that going on. So, oh, and then you can even send me a little email if you want.
And how would they reach you by email?
It's on the website too. There's a little spot, that you can just send it in and I'll get it, or Regina@reginagale.com.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being my guest on this particular afternoon. Have thoroughly enjoyed having the conversation and definitely enjoyed talking about a number of things. And do know that you are always welcome to come back anytime that you feel like it, because we love having return guests as well as folks just coming back and all of that. So get ready to put on about a couple of the other shows that air here on this particular network. One that we've actually moved. So I think on this particular spot, it says 1 o'clock on Thursdays, but we've actually moved it to 12 o'clock, that being the Gamers Den, as well as Talking Upstream, which is my friend Zach and Dylan doing a whole whiteboarding concept where they are oftentimes finding new movies, ideas that they're creating, new TV shows, new comic books, and a number of other things. And the Gamers Den is actually about the video game industry. So bringing those spots up, and then I'll get this airplane, which is kind of our theme to get on out of here and all of that. But right now, you're ready to let folks check out about the Gamers Den. But do remember that the actual time on Thursdays is at 12 o'clock. I think that it says 1 on this particular ad. Before I get out of here, the one thing that my coworkers would probably get on me for not talking about is that at the official website, which is IBMTV.tv, we've also got a store. So if you go to that store, you'll find all kinds of products. Of course, there are products that have been with us pretty much since the beginning from the dollar store, but we've also got products of different shows. Yours truly has even got some products as well, including, I believe, a cup, a hoodie, and other things that are representing the various shows that I do here on this network. So as that being part of the way that we all get paid, including myself, we would love for you to go to the store and actually buy some products. So like I said, I know that my friend, the filmmaker, Ronnie Warner, went and actually bought one of the shirts that is featuring our show on it and everything. I think that might have been the one for the radio show, but he's definitely gone out and bought some products and all of that. So if you go to the store and show your support, we will greatly appreciate that. And I know Learning Unwrapped and some other shows also have product, and new products are constantly coming online. But right now we're going to check out that Lawyer's Den and then the plane on out of here, and then I'll hit the end broadcast.